Hey guys, tonight we're time travelling back to ancient Egypt, not to tour the pyramids or get lectured about dynasties, but to do something way more important. Snoop around their kitchens and judge their snack choices. You know, the kind of history that really matters. You're about to find out what counted as junk food when sphinxes were still in style. Spoiler alert. You probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because some of these treats are, let's just say, not FDA approved. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure, just vibes. Also, drop your city and the time you're watching this in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You land in Thebes, probably a little dehydrated, and already regretting wearing sandals in the sand. The year, let's call it somewhere between 1500 and 1200 BCE, around the height of Egypt's new kingdom. It smells ancient. Dusty limestone, sweat, animal dung, and wait, something sweet? You weren't expecting that. But floating through the desert air is the unmistakable scent of honey. Yes, ancient Egypt loved sugar. Or at least what passed for sugar before industrial refinement was a thing. Honey was the go-to sweetener, harvested carefully from wild bees and sometimes kept in clay pots so long it crystallized into rock-like chunks. And Egyptians didn't just use it for sweets. They slathered it on wounds, mixed it in medicine. And, because we're here for the real truth, they dumped it on bread like it was Nutella. Dessert bread, folks. You can almost hear the crackle of crust as a scribe peels open a honey-covered roll during his break. Nearby, a kid about 7 years old is gnawing on a hardened date cluster. It looks like someone rolled fruit in sand, then forgot it in the sun. You're offered a piece. You chew, it's chewy, mostly pit, and somehow both too sweet and weirdly sour. That gritty texture? Yeah, not a candy coating, just actual sand. Welcome to snacking in the ancient world. You stroll past the food stalls in the bustling marketplace. Donkeys bray, linen flaps in the breeze, and everything's painted in ochre tones that glow under the Egyptian sun. On a mat woven from reeds, a woman is selling something that smells like burnt sugar and fried bread. You crouch down. She's ladling out a thick brown mush into tiny leaf-wrapped packets. You ask what it is. She smiles. Sesame honey cake. Ancient Egypt's version of a protein bar, except without any protein. Just crushed seeds, sticky sweetness, and an overwhelming urge to nap. Fun fact, this wasn't just peasant food. Even high-ranking officials and royal family members indulged in these treats. And while there weren't convenience stores on every block, there were vendors stationed near temples and court buildings, ready to fuel your pyramid watching with sweet, sticky carbs. But here's the real kicker. They used sugarcane, kind of. Not the refined stuff we know today, but early forms. Cane likely arrived through trade routes from further south, especially during the later dynasties. And while it wasn't mainstream like honey or dates, it did sneak into high-end kitchens and elite ceremonies, where sugarcane juice was boiled down and used in sacred offerings, or in making elite versions of your sad date cluster. And just like modern food debates, scholars still argue, did ancient Egyptians have a concept of dessert as we know it? Or was everything just another texture of offering to their 400 gods? Some believe there was no separation between meals and sweets, just food for the living and food for the dead. Others argue that honey-based desserts played a role in festivals and celebrations, specifically when honouring deities like Hathor, goddess of love, music, and possibly sweet-tooth cravings. You stop to watch a baker prepping his goods for a temple feast. He's pounding barley flour into a paste with what looks like a rock and an attitude. The smell of yeast is faint but present. There's something brewing, and it's not just ambition. You peek into his baskets and spot honey-drenched pastries. They look like dumplings that lost their will to live, crusty, lopsided, and slightly burnt. But don't judge too harshly. These were considered delicacies. And if you were lucky enough to be near the temple during one of the big annual festivals, you might get a bite of one of these half-charred, fully sticky sweets. Here's your quirky fact of the night. Archaeologists once found actual preserved honey in a tomb, still edible after more than 3,000 years. Like technically edible. If you ever wanted to try ancient sugar, that's your shot. It might give you an eternal life, or just a trip to the ER. As night creeps over Thebes, the food stalls start packing up, and the last golden rays of sunlight catch on the pure surface of a small jar beside a merchant's stand. You open it. Inside is a thick golden goo that smells oddly floral. It's honey, but infused with crushed lotus petals. This was next level. Not for commoners. You taste it. For a moment you understand royalty. Then your teeth hurt. But it's a small price to pay for history. You sit back on a crumbling stone bench, a little dazed from all the sugar. You've barely scratched the surface, and already your ancient snack tour is messing with your 21st century digestion. But there's more to taste, more to sniff, and definitely more to regret. And don't worry, we haven't even gotten to the fried things yet. You wake up to the smell of grease, not olive oil, not butter, something thicker, heavier, almost animal-like. And yep, it's definitely animal fat. Ox, if you had to guess. Which, given your very limited experience in the culinary arts of ancient Egypt, is bold of you. Still, it smells both horrifying and weirdly good, like the way campfire smoke clings to clothes and somehow makes you nostalgic for something you've never lived through. You're in the back courtyard of a nobleman's estate, probably somewhere near Memphis this time. The air is heavy with smoke and buzzing with flies, and the cook doesn't seem to care that you're standing there looking pale and modern. She's too busy flipping something over a clay pan that's half buried in coals. It sizzles loudly. You lean closer. Whatever it is, it's deep fried, it's golden brown, and it smells like it might shorten your lifespan by a full decade. This is junk food, ancient style, fried flatbreads, maybe with a little garlic mixed into the dough. The garlic's not just for flavour either. Egyptians believed it boosted strength and stamina, which made it popular with labourers and anyone hauling giant stone blocks across a desert. It's not a stretch to imagine the pyramid builders munching these crispy treats on their lunch breaks, covered in sweat and probably regretting their career choices. You reach for one, the cook slaps your hand away. Apparently these are for a house feast later, something about honouring Bastet, the cat goddess. But she softens and tosses you a smaller misshapen one that wouldn't have made the final tray anyway. You bite into it. It's crunchy at the edges and chewy in the centre, with little pockets of flavour where garlic and wild herbs have fused together in the ox fat. It's heavy, it's salty, it's amazing. And now you need water. Like, now. You wander around the estate grounds and find a group of workers under a date palm squatting around a clay pot. They're scooping something out with their fingers, and laughing through full mouths, you ask for a taste, and before you know it, someone's handing you a chunk of what looks like fried dough dipped in honey and sprinkled with crushed lotus seeds. It's like funnel cake. If funnel cake had been invented by someone who didn't believe in joy or moderation. Delicious? Yes. Regret-inducing? Also, yes. And here's a fun little twist. Much of what we'd consider snack food was actually eaten communally. No portion control, no food wrappers, and definitely no refrigeration. Food sat out all day, and people just sort of gathered around and picked at it. You'd be amazed how quickly you get used to eating with your hands, even if you're low-key panicking about germs. Germs, however, haven't been invented yet. Or rather, they exist, but no one knows or cares. Simpler times. The house steward appears and starts yelling something about preparation for the feast. The workers scatter, and you're shuffled into the back garden where the party's already being set up. Low tables, mats for sitting, ceramic pitchers and food being carried out on trays. You blend in with the hired help, no one questions the weird new servant with the haunted expression and sweat-stuck t-shirt. You carry a tray of fried fish cakes to the musicians. Someone nods approvingly. These fish cakes, surprisingly complex. Made from ground catfish or perch caught fresh from the Nile, then mashed with onions, coriander and barley flour before being fried in, you guessed it, more ox fat. They're crispy outside, soft inside, and as far as ancient Egypt goes, basically a flavour explosion. You eat two while no one's looking and instantly feel both satisfied and guilty. Probably the most historically accurate emotion so far. Now here's your historical fact for this round. We know Egyptians deep-fried food because archaeologists have found both descriptions and carbon traces from cooking areas that suggest hot oil use. And while they didn't have thermometers or timers, they definitely knew their way around a good sizzle. Kitchens were often separate from main homes due to smoke and fire hazards, plus, let's be real, the smell of frying animal fat clings to everything. As twilight settles in, the feast begins. Musicians pluck stringed instruments, dancers whirl around in linen that catches the last rays of sunlight, and guests dig in with enthusiastic hands. There's a joy in it, unfiltered, messy, almost primal. It's not polite dining, it's eating like you mean it. But here's where it gets weird. A bowl of what looks like glazed pastries gets passed around. You're expecting something like cinnamon rolls. Instead, you're hit with a bite that's half sweet, half spicy, and 100% confusing. There's honey, sure, but also something like ground fenugreek or cumin. The taste lingers, not in a good way. One guest explains, between mouthfuls, that the spice mix is sacred. It's part of a family recipe passed down for generations and linked to ritual offerings. Another guest disagrees, loudly says it's just trendy temple food and that spices ruin everything. You sit back and watch the ancient equivalent of a Reddit food thread play out in real time. This brings us to our scholarly debate of the night. Did Egyptians deep fry as a luxury or as necessity? Some historians argue that frying in precious animal fat was a high-status move, only for those who could afford the waste. Others say it was an efficient way to preserve food in the heat, especially proteins like fish. The jury's still out. But as you gnaw on your third fish cake, you decide it was probably both. Humans have always been complicated like that. As night deepens and torches flicker to life, the cook who slapped your hand earlier waves you over. She hands you a final snack, some kind of fried flatbread rolled into a cone and stuffed with mashed lentils and wild herbs. You bite in and immediately burn your tongue. You don't care. It's worth it. Your eyes water. It's the most flavourful thing you've eaten all day, and it tastes like history. Hot, greasy, a little smoky, and too good to be forgotten. You sit by the fountain with your mystery wrap, listening to the party wind down. Somewhere in the shadows, a cat sneaks a bit of fish off an abandoned plate. You toast it silently. Bastet would approve. Morning again, and this time you're waking up on a woven mat just outside the workers' village near Deir el Medina. Your back hurts. Your mouth is dry and your stomach is confused. Yesterday's fried fish cake is still very much present, staging some kind of slow-moving revolt. But you're not here to be comfortable. You're here to chase down ancient Egypt's version of junk food. And it looks like today's menu is going to be very fibre-forward. You roll over and see a group of labourers eating breakfast. The sun's barely up, and they're already tearing into crusty loaves of bread and drinking what looks like cloudy beer. One guy gestures to you and hands over a bite of what appears to be a date. Just a date, shriveled and dark, but still sweet when you chew it. Then another date. Then a fig. Then some sort of dried paste that might have once been pomegranate. Each bite is chewy, slightly fermented, and clings to your teeth like it's trying to become one with your gums. And then it hits you. The ancient Egyptian equivalent of trail mix. It's just dried fruit and nuts mashed together and sun-cured into sticky blobs, probably wrapped in a palm leaf or shoved into a pot. This was snack food for workers, the kind of thing you could carry in your tunic and gnaw on during a break from carving hieroglyphs. You start to appreciate the logic. Simple ingredients, no prep, little burst of sugar and boom, back to chiseling stuff into walls. But not everything you're chewing is totally safe. One of the workers shows off a snack he says is made from green figs. You try it and instantly regret it. It's sour, mouth-puckering and vaguely bitter in that this could be poison kind of way. Turns out some varieties of wild figs weren't just unripe, they were borderline toxic. Egyptians ate them anyway, because that's what you do when your options are, this probably won't kill me or go hungry. High risk, high reward. You start to feel a rumble deep in your gut. Uh-oh, the date fig mash has teamed up with the ox fat from yesterday and declared war. You wander off looking for a private spot to think about your life choices, and maybe reconsider your time-travelling career. By mid-morning, you're staggering back toward the village centre, where a woman is boiling something in a blackened pot. The smell is earthy and sour, like old yogurt mixed with sweat. She hands you a bowl and smiles. You take a sip. It's lukewarm, chunky and aggressively tangy. Milk, sort of, but not fresh. This is probably fermented goat milk, one of the many things ancient Egyptians did with dairy besides making cheese. And here's your quirky fact. Egyptians loved their dairy, but refrigeration was, well, not a thing. So they got creative. Sour milk drinks, cheese that tasted like wet bread, and butter that smelled faintly of sheep. And they didn't just drink it, they used it in medicine. Religious rituals, and sometimes even hair care. Yes, you could condition your locks with goat yogurt. Were you supposed to? Absolutely not, but they did. As you choke down the last spoonful of what you now believe might have been early kefir, or some punishment disguised as a beverage, you remember that some Egyptian texts mention milk as pure food of the gods. That tracks. because only a deity with an iron stomach could drink this willingly. By noon you're hiding under the shade of a date palm, your stomach doing small gymnastics, when a merchant wagon rattles by. It's pulled by a donkey and loaded with baskets of... Wait, is that more food? You jog up beside the cart and ask the driver where he's going. He says he's headed toward the West Bank to sell snacks to workers at the temple complex. You hitch a ride. This might be your best shot at discovering what actual working-class junk food looked like in the dirt and heat of everyday labour. When you arrive, the scene is wild. Masons and painters are sprawled out under tarps, shirtless and sunburned, passing around what looks like mashed beans and flatbread. Others are chewing something reddish-brown, spitting out the pits. You try it. More dates, of course, but these have been soaked in some kind of syrup, thick, sweet, slightly smoky, possibly boiled with resin or myrrh. Dessert with a touch of embalming fluid, classy. One man offers you a bowl of lentil stew but says it's better cold, like pudding. He's not wrong, it's a starchy, spiced with coriander, and surprisingly filling. Someone adds a drizzle of leftover beer mash on top. This isn't so much a recipe as a dare, but it works. You slurp it down like a sad parfait and feel the day's heat creeping into your skull. Here's your historical fact of the day. Archaeologists have found traces of these exact ingredients, lentils, dates, and legumes in pottery shards at workers' camps, and some of these ancient junk foods were highly regional. For example, in Lower Egypt near the Delta, they preferred pickled radishes and garlic snacks. In Upper Egypt, it was more about dried fruit clusters and barley cakes. Which brings us to tonight's scholarly mystery. Were these snacks truly junk food in the way we understand it? Or were they just the only food available between real meals? Some scholars argue so that the lack of nutritional planning made them inherently junk, unbalanced, heavy on sugars and carbs. Others think this is a modern bias, and that to ancient Egyptians anything portable and edible was just smart design. Either way, your stomach doesn't care about the academic nuances. It's now a churning cauldron of ancient carbs, sour dairy, and resin-glazed dates. You lie back on a stack of woven baskets, watching vultures circle lazily in the sky, and try not to think about what your intestines are going to do next. The sun's going down, casting long shadows over the temple walls. Workers are packing up, wiping dust from their faces, and tucking leftover snacks into cloth pouches. You're handed one. Inside are 3 rock-hard figs, a crumbling wedge of barley bread, and a tiny clay cup of beer residue. Not a feast, but it's honest. You take a slow bite of the bread and let the crunch echo in your skull. Somewhere nearby, someone lights a small fire and tosses in a handful of dried herbs. The smoke drifts up, mixing with the last bits of sunlit dust. You sit in the middle of it all, bloated, curious, and a little too full of lentils. Tomorrow you decide you're skipping the figs. The sun rises with that slow golden creep that makes you think everything's calm and gentle, until it smacks you in the face and reminds you that you're still in the middle of an ancient Egyptian summer, surrounded by sand, sweat, and what you now know is a civilization deeply committed to the carb life. Today's adventure? Bread. More bread. And maybe, if you're lucky, something mildly alcoholic that passes for beer. You've heard whispers about a bakery just off the riverbank that supplies the entire local temple staff. You head that way, stomach still unsure of yesterday's bean dairy fruit extravaganza. The first thing you notice when you get there is the heat. Not the sun. This heat is from the ovens buried in the ground and covered with slabs of stone, radiating like they've been cooking since the time of Ra himself. A team of women is kneeling in the dust, slapping discs of dough into shape and throwing them into the blazing holes in the earth. The smell is warm, yeasty, and almost comforting, until you realise none of them are wearing shoes, and all of them are covered in flour dust, and what you're praying is just flour. One of the bakers notices your stare and tosses you a loaf. It's misshapen, a little burned on one side and rock hard on the other. You bite into it anyway. Crunch. Immediately you understand why so many mummies have terrible teeth. There's sand in the bread, not sprinkled on top, in it. You chew through the grit like a champion and nod politely. She smiles. You win. Here's the thing, bread was everything in ancient Egypt. Not just food, it was currency, ritual, offering and sustenance. Most people ate some variation of it multiple times a day. The most common version was made from barley, sometimes emmer wheat, and occasionally with added ingredients like dates or spices, depending on what you could afford. And because the grinding stones were rough and the flour wasn't sifted, sand and tiny bits of stone often made it into the dough. Delicious, right? You're invited to watch the process more closely. Grain is poured onto a grinding slab and pulverized by hand with a heavy stone. The rhythmic scraping is hypnotic, almost meditative, until you notice the baker's hands are bleeding. Tiny cuts from the grit. She doesn't stop, just keeps grinding. You feel very privileged to be from a world with stand mixers and band-aids. Over by the ovens, another group is preparing something called beer bread. This is where things get interesting. They take partially fermented barley mash, the leftovers from brewing, and mix it with ground flour, then bake it until it's solid enough to chew but soft enough to mash again later. Basically, it's bread designed to be turned back into drink. You're handed a piece. It's wet, squishy, fermented, somewhere between banana bread and bad decisions. You eat it anyway. The taste, sour, earthy, slightly fizzy, like someone left oatmeal in a hot room for a week and then dared you to try it. Here's your historical fact. This bread-beer combo wasn't just common, it was essential. Daily rations for labourers often included several loaves of bread and large jugs of beer. That's how you got your calories, your hydration, and apparently your mild buzz all in one go. It wasn't just sustenance, it was survival. You ask one of the younger bakers if anyone ever ate bread for pleasure. She laughs and points to a tray cooling under a woven screen. You lift it carefully. Inside are tiny loaves shaped like animals. Fish, birds, cats, decorative bread, likely made for temple offerings or special celebrations. You nibble one shaped like a falcon. It's denser than the worker bread, subtly sweet and filled with a paste made from dates and crushed sesame. It's still dry, but definitely less sad. If ancient Egypt had a birthday cake, this might be it. But then comes the fringe fact of the day, and you are not ready. One of the elders insists that certain types of sacred bread were intentionally fermented with animal droppings. Not a lot, just enough to wake up the spirit of the grain. You nod slowly, pretending you didn't just hear that, and politely decline a second helping. Later that afternoon, the bakers take a break. You sit with them under a patch of shade as they pass around a shared jug of thick, frothy beer. It's not carbonated, it's chunky. Like soup and beer had a baby and no one told it how to behave. You're offered a sip. It tastes better than it looks, but that's not saying much. The alcohol content is low, but the funk level is high. Still, after the fifth or sixth sip, it starts to grow on you. Or maybe you've just given up. And here's a point of debate among modern scholars. Was Egyptian beer actually alcoholic? Some say yes, mildly. Others argue it was more like liquid porridge, nutritional but not intoxicating. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. A few jars for lunch wouldn't knock you over, but drink enough and you might start worshipping a statue or yelling at a cat. Which, honestly, sounds like a normal Tuesday here. The day winds down and the bakers begin prepping for the next sunrise. Dough is left to ferment in clay jars, flour is ground, and herbs are laid out to dry. You help clean up by brushing out one of the ovens, only to discover a piece of charred bread stuck to the inside wall. It's black as coal and smells like burnt popcorn. You take it out, curious. A baker laughs and says, "Temple priests say even burnt bread pleases the gods." You shrug and try a bite. It's awful, but apparently holy. As night falls, the bakers light a small fire and make one final treat. Tiny honey and herb biscuits baked on a hot stone. You take a bite, soft, sweet, with just a hint of thyme. For a moment, it tastes almost modern. You sit back in the dark, licking honey from your fingers and watching the stars flicker above the Nile. Somewhere far off, a hyena laughs into the quiet. You're full of bread, of beer, of questions. But mostly bread. It's the middle of the night, and you're awake again. Not because you're cold or lost, but because your stomach is staging another protest. You lie there on your mat, thinking through everything you've eaten. The lentil parfait, the honey bread, the fermented milk soup, the fig incident. Your digestive tract feels like it's writing hieroglyphs across your insides, but you're still curious. Curious enough to sneak out before dawn and follow your nose downwind towards something crispy. The scent gets stronger as you approach the rear alley of a food stall in the village outskirts. Less temple, more farmer's market vibe. You hide behind a storage jar the size of a Mini Cooper and peek around the corner. There, hunched over a low huiso pan, is a man slowly stirring what looks like cubes of bread in a bubbling pool of something unmistakably fatty. You step closer. He doesn't flinch, just grunts and gestures to the pan. You lean over. The cubes are browning into small, crunchy pillows. Fried bread again. But this time dipped in an oily glaze that smells both savoury and a little sweet. He says one word, ox. Just that. Ox. Fat. You nod like that makes sense. He ladles one of the sizzling blocks into a clay bowl, sprinkles a mixture of herbs on top, and hands it to you. You take a bite. It's everything you feared and everything you hoped. Greasy, rich, dripping down your chin, and just salty enough to make your tongue beg for water. Turns out, frying things in animal fat was practically an art form here. Ox fat wasn't cheap. It came from slaughtered working animals, not something you could afford to use every day unless you had connections or you worked in a butcher's family. But when people did use it, they went all in. Fried breads, fried lentil cakes, even fried onions stacked and layered with herbs, then eaten cold like a very sad lasagna. You sit down on an overturned jar and try another bite. The bread is crisp on the outside, soft in the middle, and covered in a glaze that might just be date syrup cooked down with garlic. It sounds terrible. It's not. Your brain's confused, your taste buds are curious, and your arteries are already sending up flares. While you chew, the man tells you, mostly through gestures, that he learned to cook from his grandmother, who used to make something similar during big river festivals. People would gather near the banks of the Nile, bring whatever scraps they had, and fry them up over open fires. It wasn't high dining, but it was fun. Loud, chaotic, probably dangerous, but fun. And here's your historical fact of the night. In several tombs and village ruins, archaeologists have found remains of frying vessels and greasy residue in cookware, suggesting that deep frying wasn't just a modern indulgence, it was alive and well in ancient Egypt. Though not common for everyone, it had its place in feast culture, especially when honouring gods like Hathor or celebrating the annual flooding of the Nile. You thank the man, half-heartedly wipe your fingers on your tunic, and decide to wander further down the road. The night air is cooler now, with a breeze that smells of river water and burning acacia. In the distance you see a few fishermen returning from the Nile, their baskets sloshing with the day's catch. You wave. They wave back and gesture for you to come closer, and just like that your stomach is back in the game. The fishermen have set up a small fire and are preparing what can only be described as deep-fried fish bits. Not full fish, just bits. Pieces of perch and catfish sliced thin, soaked in beer mash, and tossed in a pan of bubbling fat, possibly the same ox fat from earlier, just slightly more river-flavoured now. One of the younger fishermen adds wild herbs from his pouch, something like coriander or maybe just swampweed, and tosses the sizzling bits like he's done this every night of his life. You try a piece, hot, crispy, a little chewy, somehow both swampy and salty. The kind of snack you'd love with cold beer, if the beer didn't taste like barley porridge filtered through someone's sandals. Here's a delightfully weird fringe fact. In some regions, people used to fry fish in crocodile fat. Yeah, you read that right. Crocodile. The fat was rendered during butchering, and used sparingly for flavour and ritual cooking. Was it tasty? Probably not. Was it macho? Absolutely. You imagine someone biting into crocodile-fried catfish just to prove they're braver than their neighbour. As the fire dies down, the fishermen tell stories. One claims to have seen Sobek, the crocodile god, rise from the Nile and accept an offering of fried fish with a nod. Another laughs and says he once tried to fry a fish using only the sun and a polished bronze plate. Didn't work, but it smelled great. This leads into tonight's scholarly debate. Was deep frying actually widespread, or was it exaggerated in later romanticised accounts? Some say the oil required made it a rare celebratory act. Others believe communal cooking allowed for pooling resources, making it more common among working communities than we think. There's no clear consensus, but the pans don't lie. And the grease-stained ruins near the worker villages suggest that the frying party was very real. It's nearly dawn when you finally stand up, belly full of questionable protein and ox oil bread. The fishermen offer you a small wrapped packet. Inside are a few leftover fried fish scraps, still warm, tucked into a palm leaf cone. You tuck it into your satchel like the world's saddest doggy bag. As you walk back toward your mat under the stars, the desert wind picks up. Somewhere off in the distance, a jackal yips into the early light, maybe looking for its own greasy breakfast. You sit down, unwrap the cone, and take one last bite. It's cold now, and the oil has started to harden. But still, there's something comforting in it. Something universal. Crispy, hot, salty, slightly regrettable. Ancient Egypt's version of fast food. You wake up coughing, softly at first, then like your lungs are trying to climb out of your body. The air is thick. Not with sand this time, but smoke. Smoky sweet, sour, and suspiciously dairy adjacent. You blink your way upright and immediately regret it. You've wandered into a part of the workers' village that smells like someone tried to cook yogurt and then forgot to stop, and yep, as you step into the narrow alley, you find the culprit. An old man hunched over a bubbling pot is muttering to himself in a mix of ancient Egyptian and the universal language of, "Why is this still boiling?" He's churning something with a long stick, and every time he lifts it out, the mixture clings to it like a milk-based ghost. He sees you watching, grins with half his teeth and motions for you to sit. You do, mostly out of fear, and the next thing you know, he's ladled a scoop of his hot swampy brew into a rough clay bowl and handed it to you. You bring it to your lips, smells challenging. You sip. It's tangy, really tangy, sour in a way that makes your eyes water a little. It's thick, grainy and slightly salty, like someone tried to make a milkshake with goat cheese and gave up halfway through. Congratulations, you're now drinking ancient Egyptian sour milk. This was actually a thing. Without refrigeration, milk turned fast, but instead of dumping it, Egyptians leaned in, they fermented it intentionally. They stirred it with herbs, left it in pots to curdle under the sun, and sometimes added honey or beer dregs to cut the edge. It was the origin of soft cheeses, kefir-like drinks, and things that blur the line between refreshment and a dare. And here's your historical fact. Wall paintings and records from the Old and Middle Kingdoms show offerings of white drink or white food being presented to the gods, widely believed to be fermented dairy. It was seen as pure, nourishing, and sometimes even sacred, but that doesn't mean it was always pleasant, especially not at breakfast. You glance around and realise this isn't a one-man operation. A small group of people, maybe his family, maybe just neighbours with strong stomachs, are gathering with clay jugs and baskets. They scoop the still-warm curdled mixture into palm leaf wraps, sprinkle dried herbs on top, and carry them away, likely toward the market or nearby temple staff. Turns out this sour milk sludge is snack-worthy in its own way. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a probiotic smoothie. Except chunky. Very, very chunky. One woman notices your face mid-sip and laughs. She pats your back and hands you a woven pouch with a small round something inside. You open it cautiously. It's cheese. Soft, slightly moist, and smelling faintly of garlic. This is rush cheese, an early form of what we'd recognise as farmer's cheese or paneer. You nibble it, and it's not bad. Salty, a little sour, and a welcome break from the hot milk soup. Soup still sitting in your stomach like a warm, unhappy rock. But of course, nothing is that simple. She hands you another pouch. Inside is a darker cheese, crusty at the edges, smelling like decay. You look at her. She grins wider and mimes licking it. You're in too deep now. You take the tiniest possible bite. Instant regret. It tastes like milk, smoke, and betrayal. Like someone buried cheese underground and waited to see what would happen. Which, fun fact, is actually something they did. Some cheeses were aged in cool clay jars, partially buried to keep them from spoiling too fast. Whether this one is a masterpiece or a mistake is unclear. You're too busy trying not to cry. Quirky fact of the day. Some researchers believe ancient Egyptians used donkey milk not just for cheese but for cosmetics. Cleopatra was famously rumoured to have bathed in it. Wouldn't be surprising if she also snacked on a sour milk wrap while soaking in luxury. Honestly, the whole thing sounds like a very exclusive spa treatment with an appetizer course. You follow the woman through the back alley and into a small garden courtyard where more dairy experiments are happening. Pots line the walls, each labelled in crude markings. One's bubbling with what might be early yogurt. Another smells like it might be lemon rind cheese. And over in the corner, a boy is smearing goat butter on slices of cold barley bread and sprinkling it with, of all things, dried fish flakes. He offers you one. You take it. It's bizarre, fishy, creamy, grainy. Like someone tried to invent pizza but got confused halfway through. But it's a snack, a real one. Something a kid might actually enjoy sitting on a wall, watching beetles crawl by. Here's your scholarly debate. Did ancient Egyptians like sour foods, or did they just adapt to what the climate forced on them? Some argue that taste evolved around necessity. Fermented food kept longer, travelled better, and often carried spiritual value. Others say people genuinely enjoyed the sour tang and prized it in recipes. There's still debate over whether the sourness was a feature or a bug. Judging by the kid happily eating his fish cheese sandwich, it might have been both. As the sun climbs, the courtyard gets hotter. Someone brings out chilled clay jugs of something white and foamy. The first sip hits you like a slap. It's cold, which is nice, but it tastes like milk soda mixed with vinegar and sadness. Still, after everything you've tried, you sip again. It's not worse than that weird wheat beer. And it's hydrating, probably. Before you go, the old man waves you over again. He hands you a small cup, something ceremonial clearly. It's filled with a pale blue liquid that shimmers faintly in the sunlight. You sniff it. It smells like sour milk and crushed herbs. You drink. Immediately your mouth goes numb. You smile. He smiles back. It's ancient Egyptian dairy liqueur. Probably just fermented milk with blue lotus extract or something herbal. But it hits like a shot of something deeply not legal in your century. You feel warm, dizzy, maybe slightly enlightened. You walk away feeling like you've joined a very ancient, very fermented club. You return to your spot near the reed mat, lie back and let the milk dreams take over. Somewhere in your mind, cheese gods are dancing, or maybe that's just your liver asking for a vacation. Either way, you're done with dairy. For now. When you wake up this time, there's no fire, no bustling village, no cheese-scented air. Just the soft splash of oars, the creak of a boat hull, and the warm sun pressing down like a sleepy hand on your back. You're floating down the Nile. Don't ask how you got here. Just blame the dairy liqueur from last night. You're wedged between two baskets of fish, your legs dangling lazily over the side, drifting past reeds and lily pads like an ancient Egyptian extra in a National Geographic reenactment. A fisherman squints at you from across the boat, says something you don't understand, then tosses you a piece of something leathery and dark. You sniff it. It smells like low-tide gym socks and ambition. You take a cautious bite and instantly regret every decision that brought you to this moment. Sun-dried catfish jerky. It's chewy, like impossibly chewy. You gnaw for what feels like 20 minutes before it breaks down enough to swallow. It's salty, yes, but also weirdly sweet, probably from the smoke or some primitive glaze. And you realise this is boat food. Nile snacks, stuff you could pack for a long day of fishing and still gnaw on at sunset. Think beef jerky, but if the cow had gills and dreams of vengeance. The fisherman grins and offers you a flask. You take a swig. It's not water. It's cold beer, or as close as beer gets around here. Fermented barley water, cloudy and barely alcoholic, but refreshing after a salty mouthful of fish rubber. You look around the boat. It's simple. A few woven mats, some reed baskets full of odds and ends, and a small cooking pot rigged on a makeshift fire pit. The fisherman gestures toward a bundle wrapped in palm leaves. He unwraps it slowly, ceremonially, like he's revealing treasure. Inside, more snacks. Dried river reeds pounded into something between a flatbread and a chew toy, mixed with crushed nuts. Maybe some honey and, oh, fun, bits of what looks like crayfishy. You try a piece. It's crunchy, oddly sweet, and tastes like pond water wrapped in sugar. Somehow not terrible. You chew slowly and stare out at the Nile, dotted with other tiny boats and wide-winged birds drifting across the sky like ancient kites. Historical fact incoming, the Nile wasn't just a highway, it was a floating pantry. Fish were an essential protein source and not just the fresh kind. Drying and salting fish made it portable, and fermented fish paste, yes, fish paste, was used as a seasoning in all sorts of dishes, from stews to bread spreads. It was like Egyptian anchovy paste, and it made everything smell like regret. The fisherman tapped your shoulder and points ahead. On a small sandy bank, another boat is docked, and a family is picnicking. You pull in beside them and are immediately handed what looks like a ball of mashed barley wrapped in lotus leaves. You bite in. It's soft, earthy, and wait, is that fruit? There's a hint of fig in there, maybe even raisins. Ancient granola ball. The kids are popping them into their mouths like candy, giggling and racing each other around the boat. You're starting to think you've stumbled into a prehistoric lunch break. You sit with them on the sand. Someone offers you a slice of something flat to thin, and glistening with what looks like fish oil. You accept, you always accept. It tastes like sesame and despair, but it's filling. Here's your quirky fact. The ancient Egyptians sometimes made riverweed snacks. That's right, riverweed. They'd gather floating plants from shallow waters, dry them, press them into cakes, and serve them with salt or dried fish. High in fibre, low in flavour, questionably digestible. One of the older women pulls out a jug sealed with beeswax. She pops it open, and a sweet fermented scent wafts out, like honey wine left too long in the sun. Everyone perks up. They pass around small clay cups, and you're given a sip. It's a homemade brew of date syrup, beer mash, and fermented reeds. Sticky, strong, and undeniably funky. You take a second sip. Either it's growing on you, or your standards have sunk beneath the Nile's surface. Debate of the day. Were these riverbank snacks the norm, or just what the poor ate while the wealthy dined on spiced meats and honey-glazed pastries? Scholars argue about the stratification of ancient diets, whether the Nile's everyday boat crew was eating trash food, or if these humble offerings were actually balanced, intentional nutrition. Some say these families had optimized their diets with what they had, creating smart, sustainable food systems. Others think they were just surviving, not thriving. But as you sit under the sun, nibbling on mashed fig barley and watching a kid drop his crayfish ball into the river with a whale, it doesn't feel like survival. It feels like a picnic, simple, unpolished, river-smelling joy. The fisherman stands and gestures to go. You help push the boat back into the current. As you drift away, the picnic fades into the golden haze, and a cool breeze brushes past your face. The Nile glistens, reflecting the late afternoon sky. You lean back, stomach full of questionable protein and fishy fibre, and close your eyes. There's something hypnotic about it all. The bob of the boat, the soft slap of water against wood, the faint scent of dried reeds and honey beer, somewhere between sleep and consciousness. You wonder if you'll dream in hieroglyphs tonight. You dock somewhere near dusk, stepping off the boat with legs like wet papyrus and breath that smells vaguely of fish jerky and fermented reeds. You probably won't be invited to any royal banquets anytime soon, but that's okay. Tonight isn't about the royals, it's about the vendors, the real MVPs of ancient Egyptian snacking culture. The ones who knew how to hustle, charm and lightly swindle you with hot food on the go, centuries before anyone said the words street taco. You follow the crowd into a small riverside settlement. No fancy monuments here. No gold-leafed anything, just narrow walkways, reed fences, and a glorious, chaotic bazaar buzzing under fading orange light. Every third person is holding food. You hear laughter, clinking jars, and the sizzle of something being flipped over a flame. Your stomach, both brave and probably ill-advised, rumbles like a bored god demanding tribute. There's a vendor near the centre stall who catches your eye. He's got a tiny fire pit balanced on 3 carved stones, with skewers resting across the top like he's auditioning for ancient Egypt's chopped. You lean in and see what's cooking. Something thin, dark, and kind of shiny, he tells you, grinning. It's crocodile jerky. Well, you're not sure if he's serious, but he waves a skewer in front of your face like a magician with a meat wand. You take it. It's spicy, like surprisingly spicy. There's no chili, but it's packed with crushed coriander, ground garlic, and something that leaves a slow, creeping burn on your tongue. The texture? Tough. You chew and chew and chew again. It's either crocodile or a shoe that lost a fight with a grill. You decide not to ask. Turns out crocodile meat was indeed consumed in some areas, especially in the south, where crocodiles were both feared and revered. Eating them wasn't common, especially since the god Sobek was a literal crocodile and might take offence. But it did happen, and the meat was salted, dried, and sometimes sold in markets, particularly when someone caught a small one, or got bold enough to trap a young male near the reeds. You move along, passing stalls selling everything from fried onions wrapped in flatbread to chunks of honey-drenched barley bars stacked like golden bricks. One woman is selling a kind of crunchy pastry made of lentil flour and filled with mashed dates. She calls it sweet pockets. You buy one. It crumbles in your mouth like soft gravel, but the filling is rich and gooey, almost like a warm fig Newton, if fig Newtons came with the risk of contracting ancient bacteria. At another stall you find something even stranger. A man is fanning a fire beneath a bubbling pot and ladling out small servings into thick palm leaf cones. You peek inside and see pale chunks swimming in what looks like syrup. He offers you a taste, pointing to a picture of a hippo carved onto a wood sign behind him. You freeze. Is this? He nods. Fat of hippo, he says, proud, with carob and honey. Your brain does backflips. Hippo-fat caramels. That's what you're about to eat. You stare at the molten blob for a second longer than necessary, then take a bite because you've clearly lost control of your life. It's fatty, rich in a way that coats your mouth and soul. The carob and honey are doing their best, but there's no mistaking the earthy heaviness of rendered hippo. It's both dessert and survival ration. You swallow and decide never to speak of this again. Quirky fact of the day, some rare feasts, especially among the Nile Delta elite, included exotic meats, hippo, giraffe, even lion in some absurd cases. Not everyday meals, but occasional flexes of wealth and danger doming. Hippo-fat specifically was also used in medicine and cosmetics, making it one of the more versatile weird ingredients of the time. You chase the caramel with something safer, probably. A small roasted pastry shaped like a pyramid, filled with chickpeas and crushed nuts, and drizzled with a syrup made from date wine. It's nutty, slightly savoury, and, thankfully, not made of hippo. You make a mental note to find this vendor again, if you survive the night. Across the way, 2 teenage boys are frying something in a shallow pan and shouting about its aphrodisiac properties. You step closer, out of curiosity and poor judgment, and discover they're selling fried lotus root strips dusted with some kind of dried herb powder. You try one. It's crispy, slightly floral, and tastes like it would pair well with not being told it's an aphrodisiac. They wink at you anyway. You walk away faster than you chew. Here's your scholarly debate for the night. Were food vendors like this common, or were they exaggerated in romanticised texts and modern imaginations? Some researchers say bustling food stalls were mostly a city thing. Memphis, Thebes, Heliopolis. Others believe informal street vending was widespread, with everyday people selling whatever they could cook in bulk. The lack of written records on lower-class food culture makes it hard to know for sure. But if smell is evidence, then these places were real, very real, and unforgettable. As the sky dims, lanterns flicker to life, small clay bowls filled with oil and tiny reeds serving as wicks. The whole market glows like a floating constellation. Vendors shout their final offers, kids dart through the crowd with sticky fingers and half-eaten honey cakes. A group of musicians begins to play nearby, their flutes and hand drums weaving into the hum of night commerce. You find a quiet corner near a closed stall and sit down, hands sticky, head buzzing from salt, sugar, and that deeply confusing hippo candy. You pull out the last of your snacks, a leftover sweet pocket and the now hardened crocodile skewer. You nibble on both, watching as the market slowly winds down. A cat slinks past you, stops, and eyes your food. You break off a bit of jerky and toss it its way. It sniffs, considers, and then walks off like you've offended its ancestry. Fair. You lean back against the stall's wall, the smells of the night still clinging to your clothes. Fried oil, honey, river mud, and crushed herbs. It's the scent of a civilization that knew how to turn just about anything into food, whether it should have or not. And honestly, you respect it. You wake up to the sound of buzzing. Not voices, not footsteps, not the gentle clink of pottery. No, this is a full-on bee rave somewhere nearby, and it's growing louder by the second. You crack one eye open and realise you're lying dangerously close to a large clay hive, a honey hive to Meuse. And judging by the bee traffic, someone forgot to put up a do not disturb sign. You roll away slowly, so slowly it feels like a scene from a horror movie set in a botanical garden, and crawl out from behind the stall where you passed out. The bazaar is quiet now. Morning light filters through strips of linen hanging above the walkway. Everything's soft gold and dusty shadows. You're sticky, groggy, and probably still digesting something unholy from last night, but the honey scent hits you like a blessing. You follow it around the corner into a quiet alley, where a woman is tending to a series of low, domed clay structures lined up against a wall. Beehives, ancient Egyptian style. She doesn't flinch when you approach, just hands you a flat piece of bread smeared with thick, amber goo. You bite in before your brain can stop you. It's incredible. Sticky, floral, a little smoky from being stored in a clay jar near the hearth. The bread is crumbly but warm, like it was just pulled from the ashes of a small fire. The honey sinks into it, soaking the edges. It's not quite breakfast, it's not quite dessert, it's ritual food. You can feel it in your teeth. She points to a small clay pot beside the hearth. You peek inside, it's packed full of honeycomb, still glistening. Some of it has hardened around the edges, turning into candy-like chunks you could probably chip a tooth on. She offers you one. You chew slowly. It's a mix of wax, syrup, and faint floral notes, like chewing perfume, but in a good way. Kind of. This is where things get fascinating. Honey wasn't just food in ancient Egypt. It was medicine. It was preservation. It was offering. And it was power. Tombs have been found with sealed honey pots over 3,000 years old, and still perfectly edible. That's your historical fact for the day. Honey doesn't spoil. Time can't touch it. Archaeologists found honey jars in King Tut's tomb that were still smooth, sweet, and surprisingly normal looking. Meanwhile, you've thrown out yogurt that expired yesterday. Make it make sense. The woman walks over to a storage crate and pulls out a tray of pastries. At first glance, they look like rocks. Then you realise they're honey cakes, dense, dark, and shaped like little bricks. She offers one, you nibble. It's rich, soaked through with honey and something like sesame or flax, heavy enough to double as a weapon. The aftertaste lingers in your throat with a sweetness that borders on cloying, but there's no denying this is dessert. Real indulgent dessert. No pickled radish or fermented milk in sight. And now for your quirky fact. These honey cakes were often shaped like animals, hippos, falcons, even cats. Not for fun necessarily, but for symbolic reasons. Offering animal-shaped treats to the gods was common, and sometimes even part of specific feasts. Eating them, a little less common, unless you worked in a temple and had sneaky fingers. You ask if you can help, mostly to justify the fact that you're now 6 honey treats deep and starting to see the air shimmer. She laughs and shows you how to shape the dough. Barley flour, ground nuts, honey, and dried figs. You mash everything in a large bowl with a smooth stone until it sticks together, then press it into a mould carved like a lion. Symbol of strength, she says. Probably also a symbol of don't eat the whole tray. The mould goes into a clay oven, and 10 minutes later, out comes your very first lion cake. It's slightly burnt, a little crooked, but she claps anyway and hands it to you with pride. You bite the ear off. Crunchy, sweet, empowering. Then she points to a different, smaller pot nearby. This one's sealed with twine and wax. She cracks it open, and the scent punches you in the face. It's like honey, yes, but also something sharp, fermented, almost vinegary. You lean in and see something bobbing inside. Fruit, dates probably. Maybe pomegranate, soaked for weeks in honey, and something herbal. You try a small spoonful and feel your jaw clench. It's syrupy, but with bite. Like ancient Sour Patch Kids. Your teeth aren't happy, but your curiosity is. This leads into tonight's scholarly debate. Were honey-based treats common among the lower classes, or were they reserved for elites and temple rituals? Some believe that everyday folks had limited access to honey, especially in drier regions, and used it sparingly, more as a special occasion ingredient. Others argue that wild hives were common enough, and honey was bartered like any other staple. The answer probably shifts depending on the region, season, and your relationship with whoever controlled the beehives. You take one last look around the little alley bakery. Clay pots lined up neatly, bees buzzing lazily in the distance. The smell of scorched flour and hot sugar lingering in the air like a dream. You're full again. Not uncomfortably full this time. Just sweetly full, spiritually full. Maybe honey actually does have divine properties. Or maybe you're just crashing from the sugar high. Before you leave, the woman hands you a small wrapped packet. Inside are 3 tiny honey cakes, each a different shape. A hawk, a scarab, and yes, a cat. You smile, tuck them into your satchel, and step back out into the morning sunlight. The market is waking up again. Vendors setting up, kids yelling, dogs barking. But your pace slows. You're moving in syrup now, sweet ancient syrup. Somewhere deep in your jaw, a tooth pings with regret. It was worth it. You walk on, licking honey from your fingers. By the time the midday sun is overhead and cooking the stones beneath your feet like some divine punishment for curiosity, you're wandering again. This time through the more rural edges of the settlement, where the air smells not of spice or honey, but something meatier, rich, smoky, and oddly heavy. You know that smell? You've smelled it in butcher shops and on questionable camping trips. It's the smell of rendered fat, meat sizzling on stone, and you're pretty sure caramelizing something that once grunted. You follow your nose around a bend and into a clearing where a group of workers are taking a break beneath a loosely thatched awning. They're sitting cross-legged around a wide, shallow fire pit. One man is stirring a pot of bubbling liquid with exaggerated pride, and as you step closer, he beckons you over like he's unveiling a state secret. You look into the pot and your brain instantly starts trying to name the colour. Somewhere between amber and threatening. Then he says it. Hippo-fat caramels. Again? Oh no. They're back. But this time it's not just a vendor hawking something weird on a skewer. This is a group activity, a ritual almost. The pot is full of rendered hippo-fat, boiled slowly with honey, crushed carob pods, and what looks like dried pomegranate seeds. The resulting goop is thick, glossy, and so aromatic it nearly knocks you over. One worker ladles it into a wide flat bowl where it begins to cool and harden like taffy. You're handed a warm, sticky glob in a piece of palm bark. You chew and chew. It's better than last night's version. The carob brings a deep chocolate-adjacent note, and the pomegranate cuts through the fat with sharp, fruity brightness. Still, you're aware you're essentially eating dessert candles made from one of the most dangerous animals in the Nile. You're not alone in this mental gymnastic. One man explains that this dish is seasonal, prepared only when hippos are hunted during certain months when the river floods and their numbers encroach on farmland. It's a dangerous endeavour, reverent even. The fat, once rendered, becomes part of various dishes, soups, ointments, offerings, and, of course, these deeply confusing candies. Here's your historical fact for the day. Hippos were both feared and sacred in ancient Egypt. Associated with destruction and fertility, they were sometimes hunted, sometimes worshipped. Their meat and fat were rare luxuries, consumed in ceremonies for feast days. Eating hippo wasn't casual, it was event dining. Think less Tuesday night snack, and more celebration after surviving an animal that could literally bite you in half. And now for your fringe fact. Some rituals included smearing hippo fat on statues as part of fertility offerings. Yes, rubbing fat on sacred stone figures to encourage a good harvest or successful childbirth. Imagine explaining that to your dinner guests after dessert. One of the women passes you a drink, some kind of honey wine infusion, served chilled in a clay cup. It's sharp, sweet, and weirdly spicy, like it's been infused with mace or anise. It cuts right through the hippo fat, clinging to your mouth like a desperate houseguest. You feel the balance return. There's a festive air to the whole scene. The workers are laughing, elbowing each other, sharing stories, licking their sticky fingers with exaggerated sighs of satisfaction. It's not a royal feast, it's not a sacred rite, but it feels important. A celebration of survival, community, and having just enough ingredients to make something bizarrely delicious out of a river monster. You help with cleanup, scraping hardened caramel from the edges of the cooling dish, rolling it into smaller balls, dusting it with dried barley flour to keep it from sticking. One man gives you a handful tied in linen and tells you it's for later when your energy fades. You nod, already planning to hide them from yourself. After the feast, the group begins to sing, a low, rhythmic chant that sounds older than the pyramids. Someone starts drumming on an overturned storage jar. You lean back against a palm trunk, stomach heavy and full, and watch the dance begin. It's not coordinated or formal, just joy. Bodies moving in circles, dust rising around bare feet, voices rising over the hum of insects and heat. This leads into your scholarly debate. Were foods like this, rich, high-fat, sticky confections, intended for pleasure or for ceremony? Some argue that these treats, especially those made from rare ingredients like hippo, were purely symbolic, meant for offerings or rites. Others point out that humans have always found ways to indulge, and even ceremonial food gets eaten once the god statues aren't watching. The truth? Probably both. Even in the most sacred moments, someone probably snuck a bite. As the sun begins to tilt westward, you wander off toward the river, your linen tunic stiff with sugar and smoke. You unwrap one of the hippo-fat caramels and nibble it thoughtfully. The texture's changed as it cooled, now chewy, slightly crumbly, less aggressive. The flavour lingers on your tongue with a strange, comforting richness. You sit on the riverbank, watching dragonflies skim the water. A pair of ibises wade nearby, stabbing at invisible fish with curved beaks. The breeze carries the fading scent of cooked fat and burnt honey, blending into the reeds and dusk. You lean back, one hand on the warm earth, the other still holding a half-eaten caramel. You've now eaten at least 3 animals the average modern tourist would never willingly touch. Your body is either adjusting to the ancient diet or preparing for full system collapse. Hard to tell. Either way, you close your eyes, let the warm, sticky Nile air carry you into a sugar-drunk nap. The nap ends the way naps in ancient Egypt shouldn't, with someone laughing practically above you and a cat batting at your foot like you owe it something. You sit up, brushing sand from your face, and blink into the brightening dusk. A teenager with a shaved head and a single long braid is standing nearby, holding something green and vaguely suggestive. "Want some?" he says with a smirk, extending a long leafy stalk like it's the world's weirdest invitation. It's lettuce. Just lettuce. You reach for it, confused but curious. He snaps it in half and hands you a chunk. The outer leaves are limp from the heat, but the centre is surprisingly crisp. You take a bite. It's watery, mild, refreshing, after the hippo-fat carnival you attended earlier. Then you notice he's still grinning at you like you just ate a dirty joke. "Good for love," he says, wiggling his eyebrows. Oh no. Turns out, in ancient Egypt, lettuce was more than just rabbit food. It had reputation. Specifically, the variety known as Egyptian lettuce, a tall, pointy-leafed version that oozed white sap when snapped, was strongly associated with fertility and male potency. Yeah, he just bit into an ancient aphrodisiac. Casual. The teen is already crunching on his half, clearly proud of this knowledge. You nod slowly, your brain now flooded with all the implications of a society that handed around fertility lettuce like breath mints. You chew carefully, like it might do something drastic if you go too fast. Here's your historical fact. Lettuce was sacred to Min, the god of fertility and reproduction, often depicted holding an erect phallus with one hand and a head of lettuce in the other. Subtlety was not the vibe. In festivals honouring Min, lettuce was offered, waved around, and even consumed in rituals that ranged from the symbolic to the slightly scandalous. So yeah, you just had a snack and joined an unspoken cult. You follow the teen back to his home, a modest mud brick structure with an open courtyard filled with goats, chickens and siblings. Dinner preparations are underway, and lettuce is on everything. It's chopped into a mash with garlic and barley to make a sort of dip. It's roasted with lentils and wild onions. It's even mixed with date paste and rolled into leafy snacks that look like nature's version of fruit leather. You're invited to try it all. The garlic one is sharp, the roasted version is savoury and smoky, the date-rolled version is, shockingly, not terrible. Sweet and slightly herbal, with a strange aftertaste that's hard to place but not unpleasant. You eat more than you should, partially because it's the first vaguely normal vegetable you've seen in days. Then someone breaks out the lettuce wine. You brace yourself. It's green, cloudy, and smells like a salad with trust issues. You sip. It's bitter, sour, and leaves your mouth feeling fuzzy. The teen winks. You stare into the middle distance and rethink your entire snack-based time travel plan. Here's your quirky fact of the day. Ancient Egyptian texts mention lettuce as an aphrodisiac, but also as a cure for everything from indigestion to snake bites. Some medical papyri even list it as a calming agent for disturbed dreams. Meanwhile, it was also stuffed into temple offerings and used in love spells. Basically, if lettuce didn't fix it, it wasn't worth fixing. As the evening cools, the courtyard fills with family members, laughing, arguing, eating from shared bowls. You sit in a corner trying to politely decline a third helping of lettuce garlic mash, when the family matriarch brings out a basket of tiny fried things. At first you think they're seeds or nuts, then you hear one of the children crunch down loudly. Bugs. Fried bugs. Not just any bugs. Scarabs. Dried, fried, and tossed in salt and herbs like trail mix from your worst nightmare. The teen hands you a small clay bowl full of them. For strength, he says. Also crunchy. You take one. Crunch. It's a nutty, earthy, and weirdly satisfying. The wings get stuck in your teeth, but the flavour isn't bad. Another beetle joins the party, then another. It's happening. You're eating bugs, you've crossed the line, and there's no going back. This segues nicely into our scholarly debate of the day. Were insects a routine snack or more of a famine fallback? Some historians argue that insects, especially beetles and locusts, were a reliable protein source, eaten in fried or dried form across many ancient cultures. Others say there's limited evidence they were eaten regularly in Egypt outside of certain fringe or ritual contexts. Then again, evidence gets tricky when your snack can crawl away before being fossilised. The teen insists his uncle swears by scarabs for male strength, and his grandfather claims they ward off bad dreams. You're beginning to see a pattern. Eat weird thing, attribute magical quality, repeat, makes sense. As night falls, someone lights a small incense cone near the food bowls. The scent is strong, myrrh or possibly lotus resin, and instantly masks the smell of garlic and beetles. You sit back, chewing on a date, your hand still slightly green from lettuce sap. The teen leans over and asks if you feel different. You raise an eyebrow and tell him you feel extra crunchy. He laughs. Before you leave, the family insists you take a night bundle, a palm leaf packet tied with linen string. Inside, 1 lettuce date roll, 2 fried scarabs, and a tiny jar of thick green paste you refuse to identify. You walk into the cool desert air, full of fertility salad and sacred insects, with absolutely no idea what your stomach is going to do in the next 12 hours. The moon is high, casting silvery light across the rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a couple is arguing, a cat knocks something over, and a flute plays a single off-key note before giving up. You lean against a low wall, unwrap a fried beetle, and pop it into your mouth. Crunch. This is fine, probably. You don't remember falling asleep, but the way your neck is currently folded over a mud brick ledge suggests it wasn't planned. You wake up with the imprint of ancient Egyptian masonry on your cheek, and the faint taste of lettuce, date paste still haunting your tongue. It's not the worst place you've slept lately. Top 5. Honestly, but your back has filed an official complaint. You stretch, groaning like an obelisk being raised without a pulley system, and start walking. Your stomach is oddly buoyant, either out of fear or pure resignation. You cross a narrow irrigation canal and stumble into a small courtyard that smells like heat, straw, and roasted something. It's not meat, not fish, not bread. It smells crunchy. You're not ready. A man is crouched near a shallow stone basin filled with the mix of roasted grains, crushed legumes, and something that looks suspiciously like exoskeleton. He waves you over with a big soot-covered hand and offers a handful of what looks like trail mix from the underworld. You reach in against your better judgment and scoop out a mix of roasted chickpeas, cracked barley, sesame seeds, and yes, definitely scarab beetles. Not fried this time. Toasted. The texture? Crunchy. Extremely crunchy. It's not a delicate snack. You chew, then chew some more, and somewhere in there a leg gets stuck between your molars. The man chuckles like he's seen this before. You swallow, eyes watering slightly. Good for strength, he says, the phrase again. Apparently everything weird in this timeline is good for strength. You sit beside him and watch as he adds a handful of roasted ants to a new batch. Ants. Tiny ones, coated in date syrup and rolled in sesame. He offers you one. You take it. Sweet, then spicy. Someone mixed in ground coriander. It's actually not terrible. It tastes like someone tried to reimagine a granola bar with bugs instead of oats. Points for creativity. Deducted points for legs. You ask where all the bugs are coming from, and he gestures toward a cluster of woven baskets and shallow clay dishes left out in the sun. Traps, essentially. Baited with date syrup or crushed melon, they lure in scarabs, ants, and the occasional cricket. Then it's just a matter of sorting, drying, roasting, and voila, snack mix. High protein, long shelf life, surprisingly crunchy. Here's your historical fact. Insects in ancient Egypt weren't just pests, they were symbolic, sacred, and in some cases eaten. The scarab beetle or dung beetle was deeply associated with the god Khepri, a symbol of rebirth and the rising sun. While they were more commonly used in amulets and carvings, evidence suggests that certain beetles, especially larger ones, were roasted or boiled for food during festivals or lean seasons. It wasn't mainstream, but it wasn't unheard of either. What's truly wild is how matter-of-fact it all is. No one is sneaking around, hiding their beetle habits. These snacks are passed around casually like salted nuts at a tavern. A group of kids runs by, grabbing handfuls from a communal bowl. One of them has a smear of date syrup on his chin and the unmistakable wing of a roasted dragonfly stuck to his sleeve. He looks happy, carefree, like this is the best day of his week. The man beside you reaches for another bowl and offers what looks like a sticky patty. You hesitate. He breaks it in half and shows you the inside, more bugs, mashed and mixed with barley and honey, then pressed into a disc and left to harden in the sun. It's dense, heavy. You take a bite and realise it's basically an ancient energy bar. Crunchy, chewy, sweet, and horrifying if you think about it too long. And here comes your fringe fact. Some tombs have revealed storage jars with insect remains mixed into grain offerings. Whether they were intentionally added or simply contaminated isn't clear, but it's enough to spark debate among scholars. Were insects added for symbolic reasons? Nutritional? Or were the ancient Egyptians just really unfazed by crunchy surprises? Which brings us to the debate of the day. Were insects a legitimate food group in ancient Egypt or just an occasional snack of necessity? Some historians argue that bug consumption was minimal and primarily symbolic, part of festivals or special rituals. Others, especially entomologists who study ancient food remains, suggest a more utilitarian approach. Bugs were abundant, protein-rich and easily prepared. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Like everything else in this dusty, beetle-loving world, context is key. You spend the next hour helping sort bugs from grain, an oddly meditative task. You learn to spot the edible ones, the ones with the least risk of stingers or awkward textures. You even get a nickname from the kids, Beetle Biter. It sounds cooler in their dialect, probably. As the sun climbs higher, the man shares one final dish. He unwraps a bundle of palm leaf to reveal what looks like a thin pancake folded over something. Wriggly. Oh no, you take a closer look. It's not alive. Thank the gods, but it was. A lava of some kind, roasted and mashed with lentils and onion, then spread thin and fried into what you assume is ancient Egypt's closest thing to a quesadilla. You take a bite. Smoky, savoury, and, against all odds, kind of good. The onion hides whatever the lava used to be, and the texture is soft, not slimy. You nod slowly as you chew. The man beams. You're one of them now, officially inducted into the crunchy secret club. By late afternoon you say your goodbyes and walk away with another linen-wrapped snack bundle. A small jar of ant syrup, a roasted beetle cake and one lava pancake folded carefully for later. You feel heavy, weirdly proud, and slightly radioactive. The breeze picks up, stirring the dry grass and lifting tiny clouds of dust around your ankles. You find a shady spot near a half-crumbled wall and sit down, watching the horizon blur with heat and light. You unwrap the beetle cake and take a bite without thinking. Crunch. Yeah, you're fully in it now. By now, you're pretty sure your digestive system has either evolved or given up entirely. It doesn't complain anymore. It just waits. Which is probably the only reason you're able to wander into the Valley of the Workers without immediately curling into a fetal position under the nearest date palm. Because this place is gritty, sun-blasted, and humming with the kind of silent exhaustion only people who build tombs for a living can produce. You're here to shadow the lunch break of Deir el Medina's finest, stonecutters, painters, architects and labourers. These are the people who carved entire lives into limestone, whose daily grind was chipping gods and pharaohs into eternity, and they are hungry. You follow a small group past an open-air worksite where scaffolding clings to the side of a tomb entrance like a skeletal ribcage. The men are dusty, sunburned, and clearly trying not to fall apart before sunset. One of them gestures toward a shaded nook carved into the rock wall, where food is being unwrapped from cloth bundles and palm fronds like ancient lunchboxes. What you're seeing is not some royal feast. It's barely even a picnic, just dense handmade meals meant to be carried into the desert and survive the heat. A woman, maybe a wife or sister of one of the workers, pulls a squat clay pot from her basket and pops the lid. Immediately the smell hits you. Sour barley mash fermented with garlic and maybe wild leek. It's pungent. It could strip paint. But it's hot. It's filling, and it's what's for lunch. You sit cross-legged in the dust, trying to look normal and accept a scoop of the barley mash served with hard, crumbly bread that could probably double as a building material. You chew carefully. The mash is tangy, spiced with something sharp, maybe crushed mustard seed, and tastes like someone tried to turn beer into oatmeal and got halfway there. A boy beside you pulls out a handful of dried fruit strips, mostly figs and dates mashed and flattened, then coated in what looks like powdered coriander. He offers one. You take it, sweet chewy with that underlying dusty crunchy texture you've grown used to. It's sticky enough to cement your molars together. You love it. And then comes the main course. Salted dried fish. Not filleted, not garnished. Just slabs of Nile perch that have been sun-dried until they resemble old leather, and then soaked quickly in vinegar brine. You take a bite and nearly fall over. It's intensely salty, with the texture of jerky and the soul of regret. But it works. After the sour mash and flatbread, it's a briny kick to the face in the best way possible. Here's your historical fact. The workers at Deir el Medina were paid in rations: bread, beer, onions, and sometimes dried fish. These weren't bonuses. They were part of the wage system. Their meals were heavy on calories, carbs, and preservation. No frills, just fuel. These guys were building tombs, not plating appetizers. Someone else breaks open a linen bundle and reveals a flattened cake of what looks like lentil and onion mush, fried and then baked until firm. You recognize it now, an earlier, sadder version of a lentil fritter. You take a bite. It's dense, dry at the edges, and full of a sharp herbal flavour. Not amazing, not awful. Kind of comforting in a "this might be all I get today" sort of way. This group eats fast, no ceremony, just chewing, grunting, and passing water flasks around between bites. You join them, gulping down warm, bitter beer that tastes like someone put a loaf of bread in a jar and gave it an attitude. One guy tells a story about a friend who once tried to sneak into the valley with honey cakes and ended up being chased by a dog for 2 miles. Everyone laughs. Another man says his wife accidentally fed him temple offering bread one time and he was sick for a week. More laughter. You just smile, chewing quietly on what you think might be fermented onion pudding. Not sure, not going to ask. Here comes your quirky fact. In some work camps, bread pudding was a thing, layers of leftover bread mashed together with fermented milk spiced with anything available, usually onion or garlic, and left to bake in a pot over coals. It was breakfast, lunch, dessert, and punishment all in one. You're eating a version of it now, and honestly, you get it. There's a strange comfort to it, like eating a mistake made with love. As the break winds down, someone pulls out a small clay dish with 3 beetles resting onto a bed of crushed herbs. Yep, scarabs again. These ones are boiled, not fried, and served with tiny slices of pickled radish. You try one, it's soft, a little mushy. You immediately wish it were fried, but everyone else is eating them like it's no big deal, so you nod and pretend it's fine. Your soul quietly screams. Time for today's scholarly debate. Did workers eat differently than elites, or just worse versions of the same meals? Some archaeologists believe the working class had surprisingly decent diets. Heavy on bread and beer, sure, but also full of seasonal fruits, legumes, and even occasional meats. Others point to nutritional studies on mummified remains showing signs of severe wear from sand-filled bread, protein deficiency, and chronic dehydration. The truth is messy, just like this lunch. The workers begin to pack up, brushing crumbs off their tunics, tossing scraps to a waiting dog who's definitely eaten better than you today. One of them hands you a leftover lentil patty wrapped in linen and smirks, and for later, he says. You smile, tuck it into your satchel, and rise on stiff legs. The sun is still high, the stone walls shimmer in the heat, and the valley echoes with the clink of tools returning to motion. You walk away, belly full, pockets lined with questionable snacks, and more respect than ever for the people who carved eternity by hand and fueled it with fermented pudding and beetle tapas. You've now officially lost count of how many ancient snacks you've consumed, or what century your body thinks it's in. But today, things feel different. Not because your stomach has finally stopped revolting, it hasn't, or because you're getting used to pickled beetles, you're not, but because you're entering sacred ground, literally. You're walking through the sand-choked corridor of a tomb temple, the air noticeably cooler, thick with hamlets and incense. The walls are covered in painted scenes of feasts, celebrations, and gods reclining beside tables of food that seem far too elaborate for the desert. It's beautiful, surreal. And then you notice something oddly familiar. Bread, bowls of figs, what might even be a date-stuffed pastry, lovingly rendered in ancient paint. The offerings to the dead look a lot like yesterday's lunch. A temple priest appears from a side passage, eyes sunken, robes slightly dusty, and face set to eternally unimpressed. You try to explain your interest in the food, but he simply gestures for you to follow. So you do, down a winding passage deeper into the rock, until you reach a low chamber filled with, well, snacks. Not fresh, obviously. These are dried, preserved offerings laid out on reed mats and stone trays. Remnants of rituals held for generations. Some are petrified into oblivion. Others still smell faintly edible. This is where the dead dined. Not metaphorically, actual food was placed into tombs to feed souls in the afterlife. Breads, meats, fruits, wines, even beer jars sealed in wax. In theory, the ka, spiritual essence of the person, could consume the spiritual essence of the food, leaving the physical offering behind, which, you realise, means this is history's first ghost dinner party. A priestess joins you carrying a tray. On it are small replicas of tomb offerings, mock versions of the real meals once left in honour of the departed. You're invited to try them. You sit on the cold stone floor and accept a piece of dried fig, stuffed with mashed date paste and rolled in what you think is crushed carob or charred grain. It's dense, sweet, not bad considering it's been sitting in the same air as a 1,000-year-old mummy. Next, you're handed a small square of something that looks like bread but feels more like a brick. You bite carefully. It's dry beyond dry. The kind of dry that sucks the moisture from your teeth and your regrets. But beneath the crusty layer is something softer. A spiced mash of lentils and garlic. You swallow and nod politely. Here's your historical fact. Tomb workers, priests, and family members would often bring actual food offerings to burial sites on feast days and anniversaries. These weren't just symbolic gestures. They were shared meals, sometimes eaten communally beside the tomb, with a portion left for the dead. The concept of hospitality didn't end at death. If anything, it got more elaborate. You sip from a small cup, some kind of dates, wine, or the fermented fruit juice thick with sediment, and tasting like ancient punch. The priestess tells you it's made with water from a sacred well and dates harvested during the flood season. It's sharp, slightly sour, and oddly refreshing. You kind of want more. Then she brings out a delicacy, something wrapped in multiple layers of linen and palm leaf. Everyone leans in. You're expecting a sacred scroll, maybe a relic. But no, it's a cake. A honey cake. Golden brown, heavy, and is shaped like a scarab. The priestess breaks off a piece and hands it to you. It's still soft. You chew slowly. The outside is crisped with fire, the inside soaked in honey, and spiced with something warm and earthy, maybe cinnamon bark or fenugreek. It's the kind of dessert that makes you close your eyes, the kind that tastes like it was made for gods or very lucky archaeologists. And here's your quirky fact. Real honey cakes have been found sealed inside tombs, some still recognisable by shape, texture and even scent. While the exact recipes are lost, experimental archaeologists have recreated versions using barley flour, honey, dates and animal fat. The result? Dense, sweet calorie bombs meant to please the dead, or occasionally the living who sneak a taste. As you eat, a priest nearby begins to chant softly, words echoing off the stone in a way that feels less religious and more haunting. The candles flicker. You sit, chewing ancient dessert surrounded by jars labelled in ink that hasn't been touched in centuries, which leads us to your scholarly debate. Were these tomb foods genuinely intended to nourish the dead, or were they more about public display, an ancient form of virtue signalling? Some researchers say the offerings were symbolic, serving a spiritual purpose and impressing the gods. Others argue that these meals were also about status, wealth, and leaving behind evidence of a life well fed. After all, a lavish tomb feast told a story. This person was important. They dined well, remember them. You lean against a carved pillar and glance at a nearby wall painting. A banquet scene, dozens of guests reclining, servants offering goblets, dancers in motion. The table is covered in recognisable food: bread, fruit, meat, wine. You trace the painted lines with your eyes and realise something sobering. These depictions weren't just art, they were instructions, the eternal menu. Before you leave, the priestess gives you a small token, a dried lotus petal dipped in honey and rolled into a spiral. A sweet for the road, she says. You nod, tuck it into your pouch beside your lint-covered lentil patty, and step quietly back into the sun. The brightness burns for a second. You blink against it, adjusting to the heat and the buzz of flies near a nearby offering pile. Someone's brought fresh bread and onions for a newly sealed tomb. A small child places a date next to it with great seriousness, then runs off barefoot across the sand. You exhale, belly full of symbolic food and literal honey cake, and begin walking back toward the living. Somewhere behind you, the dead are still feasting, or maybe just dreaming of snacks. Either way, you get it now. Food here wasn't just fuel, it was memory, it was legacy, it was forever. You're not sure if it's the honey cake talking or just the creeping desert heat, but as you wander away from the tomb, your head starts to feel floaty, light, little buzzy, like you've accidentally slipped into a dream where everything smells like baked barley and resin. The sunlight pulses against your skin, the sand glows gold beneath your feet, and in the distance a low murmur draws you in like music you're not entirely sure is real. You follow it, because of course you do, and that's how you end up standing outside a temple courtyard where a priest is very enthusiastically lecturing a group of children about the sacred properties of Natron. Yes, Natron. That chalky, salty soda ash blend the Egyptians used to mummify things. It's basically a dehydrator in powder form, and apparently someone thought it was a good idea to eat. You edge closer and watch as one of the kids reaches into a low clay bowl and pinches a bit of natron between his fingers. He brings it to his mouth and licks. The others giggle, half horrified, half impressed. The priest nods solemnly like they've just unlocked the secrets of the universe. You stare. He sees you, smiles, and gestures for you to try. Because why not? You crouch down, pinch a tiny bit, and tap it to your tongue. Regret, immediate and overwhelming. It tastes like licking chalk dipped in dish soap. Dry, bitter, vaguely fizzy. Your tongue feels like it's trying to exit your mouth. You cough. The kids burst into laughter. But a priest, unfazed, explains that natron isn't just for drying out bodies. It's also used to preserve food, and in very, very small amounts, it was sometimes consumed to purify the body. Whether that's a real belief or an ancient dare that got out of hand, you're not sure. but your mouth still feels like it's been sandblasted. And here's your historical fact. Natron was indeed used in food preparation. Mixed in small quantities, it helped ferment bread, preserve meat, and act as a mild leavening agent. It wasn't a seasoning exactly, but it had culinary roles beyond the whole mummification gig. Egyptians loved dual-purpose ingredients. If it could embalm your grandma and make your bread rise, it was basically gold. To demonstrate, the priest brings out a tray of small loaves, flat, round, slightly greyish at the edges. Bread of the temple, he says. You break one open. It's dense, slightly sour, and has a strange mineral tang that lingers like regret. It's not inedible, but it's not friendly either. You chew slowly, trying not to grimace. The kids watch, wide-eyed. Next up is a dried meat roll. Thin slices of salted fish pressed flat and rubbed with natron, then smoked over herbs. You try a bite. It's intense. Salty, dry, with a flavour that sits right at the border of preserve and petrified. You can see how this might last through a long journey or into the afterlife. Whether it should is another matter. Quirky fact of the day, natron was also believed to have magical properties. It was sprinkled on temple floors, rubbed into statues, and dissolved into purification baths. Eating it, while rare, was sometimes linked to spiritual cleansing. Kind of like ancient spiritual mouthwash, except instead of mint, you get soda ash and bad decisions. The priest continues his sermon, now holding up a jar of what he claims is sacred salt paste. He uncorks it, and the smell hits you like a sandstorm. Sour, earthy, and deeply unpleasant. He dips a finger in and smears a dab on the edge of a small cake. You watch, horrified and intrigued, as he takes a bite. He doesn't flinch. A child follows suit, then another. You have no choice now, you accept the smallest sliver of cake with paste. Bite, chew, you regret everything. The paste is fermented natron mixed with crushed lotus root and some kind of aged fruit, possibly pomegranate or the ghost of one. The flavour is sour, pungent, and somehow hot. Your lips tingle. Your brain goes offline for a moment. Then you swallow. And honestly, it's not the worst thing you've eaten this week. You sit beside the kids as they pass around more temple snacks. Dried fig split and stuffed with salted nuts, roasted barley balls dipped in herbal ash, and yes, more bread with natron. You take small bites, pacing yourself, pretending like you're not deeply concerned about the chemical composition of everything. And that brings us to tonight's scholarly debate. Did people really eat natron, or was this more symbolic, a spiritual ingestion of sacred matter? Some Egyptologists argue that its use in food was strictly functional, for fermentation and preservation. Others suggest there were ceremonial dishes where natron played a role in flavour or ritual meaning. The line between food and magic in ancient Egypt was thin and, quite frankly, sandy. As the sun begins to dip behind the temple walls, the priest hands you a final offering, a small ball of dried fruit soaked in natron brine and rolled in crushed herbs. To keep your spirit clean, he says, you pop it in your mouth, chew, swallow. Your spirit might be clean, but your taste buds just filed a complaint. You thank him, bowing slightly, and leave the courtyard. The kids wave, some still chewing. One tries to toss natron at a goat. The goat wisely walks away. Outside, the sky is turning deep orange, the desert wind cooler now, brushing your face with a whisper of relief. You sit on a warm stone bench near a half-carved sphinx and unwrap the last of the bread in your satchel. Just barley, figs, and a hint of natron. Nothing fancy. You take a bite. The graininess, the sour edge, the faint crunch of sand, it's all normal now. Your new normal. And as the first stars begin to prick the sky, you lean back and wonder what other technically edible things the ancients might have tried. Spoiler, you're definitely going to find out. You're starting to get the hang of this. Wake up in a different part of ancient Egypt, stumble into a new food scenario, politely eat whatever strange thing is handed to you, and try not to offend any gods or trigger intestinal rebellion. It's a delicate balance, but today, as you wander into a small desert tavern tucked between a shrine and what looks like someone's goat pen, you realise you're entering uncharted territory. Not sacred, not royal, not funerary. This is snack time for the common crowd, labourers, traders, drunk uncles, and maybe one or two people who've had too many chickpeas. The tavern isn't what you'd expect. No polished wood, no menu, no tipsy bard in the corner. Just a shaded awning stretched across 4 crooked poles, a handful of clay benches, and a central fire pit surrounded by low tables cluttered with the bowls, flasks, and what appears to be a very suspicious amount of legumes. A woman waves you over, eyes sharp, arms dusted with flour and confidence. She slaps down a bowl in front of you. It's steaming. Brownish yellow, lumpy. Smells earthy. You take a cautious bite. Chickpeas, crushed, simmered with onion, coriander, garlic, and something bitter that might be wild fenugreek or just the mood of the place. It's not bad. Thick, hearty, sticks to your ribs and probably your soul. You ask what it's called. She shrugs. Mash. Fair enough. Next comes a platter of fried chickpea balls, early falafel ancestors, crispy on the outside, warm and crumbly inside, with just enough spice to make your lips tingle. You pop one into your mouth, then another, then a third. You're starting to feel invincible, or at least well insulated from the inside out. And then she drops the line. How many chickpeas is too many? You pause, mid-bite. The table goes quiet. Apparently this is an actual debate. Philosophical even. One man argues that 3 bowls a day keeps your strength up. Another says anything more than a handful turns your stomach into a sandstorm. A third, older man leans in and whispers, "They'll bloat your spirit if you're not careful." You chew slower after that. Here's your historical fact. Chickpeas were a staple in the ancient Egyptian diet. Boiled, mashed, fried or roasted. High in protein and fibre, they were one of the few plant-based proteins widely available and affordable. Archaeological digs near workers' villages have turned up chickpea remains in cooking vessels, suggesting they were everyday fare, easy to grow, store and digest, well, usually. As more bowls arrive, the conversation picks up. There's laughter, loud opinions, and the occasional goat poking its head into the scene like it also wants to weigh in. Someone passes you a flatbread stuffed with mashed chickpeas and garlic, lightly fried in what smells like donkey fat. You eat it because you've made worse decisions today. Then comes a paste, pale yellow, creamy, sharp smelling. You dip your bread in and taste. It's chickpeas mashed with pickled turnip juice and something spicy that sneaks up on you like a cobra in flip-flops. You hiccup. Everyone laughs. Someone hands you a jug of water that absolutely turns out to be beer. You don't correct them. Now for the quirky fact. Some ancient sources suggest that chickpeas were believed to have warming properties, heating the blood, so to speak. Too many, they thought, could lead to imbalance, both physical and spiritual, which is ironic given how many you've consumed in the last 10 minutes. If your blood gets any hotter, you might burst into hieroglyphs. A woman at the next table breaks open a ball of chickpea dough stuffed with herbs and what appears to be a small roasted snail. She sees your face and shrugs. It's seasonal. You take a bite. Because at this point, what's one more weird protein? It's chewy, salty, and a little smoky, not awful. You chase it with a sip of beer and tell yourself this is what bravery looks like. And now, our scholarly debate. Were these chickpea-based tavern snacks purely utilitarian, or did they represent a broader food culture among the working class? Some archaeologists argue that flavour and variety weren't exclusive to the elite. Spices and herbs were often traded and shared across class lines. Others believe tavern fare was mostly repetition, designed to fill the belly, not satisfy the palate. But as you sit here, surrounded by people arguing over chickpea texture and dipping technique, it's clear this isn't just food, it's the food, social glue, flavour debate pride. As the sun lowers in the sky, the tavern shifts into something more relaxed. A man starts plucking at a simple stringed instrument. Someone claps rhythmically. A child drops a bowl and immediately blames the goat. You lean back on your elbows, full to the brink with pulses and stories. The tavern woman returns with one last treat. Chickpeas, roasted until nearly black, then candied with a thin glaze of date syrup and vinegar. She calls them crackle peas. You pop one into your mouth. It explodes between your teeth like a burnt candy-coated nut. Sweet, smoky, shockingly addictive. You pocket a few for later like the ancient snack hoarder you've become. The evening breeze rustles the cloth above you. Someone passes a jug your way, and you pretend not to notice the sediment at the bottom. The conversations around you rise and fall like the Nile's rhythm. For a moment, you're not a time traveller or an outsider. You're just someone who's eaten too many chickpeas and is now contemplating your life. You say your goodbyes, nodding thanks, slipping a few more fried patties into your tunic because, let's be honest, you've gone full tourist. As you walk away under a sky turning violet, your belly gurgles ominously. Not from food poisoning, no, this is philosophical, existential. Chickpea induced. You ask yourself the question again. How many chickpeas is too many? You still don't know, but you're pretty sure you've passed the limit. You're not entirely sure how long you've been walking. Time moves differently when your body is approximately 70% chickpea. The desert air is cooler now, the kind of evening breeze that feels like it's whispering old secrets, or maybe just mocking your lunch choices. You follow the trail of donkey prints and fig pits until you reach a cluster of homes pressed low against a hillside, walls whitewashed and sun-cracked, smoke curling from small clay ovens like incense for the moderately hungry. A boy passes you with a basket. You peek in, beans, loads of them, dried, split, mashed, and in some cases suspiciously squirmy looking. He stops, offers you one. You nod like you haven't just eaten your weight in legumes. You pop it in your mouth. It's roasted, crunchy, slightly smoky, and... wait, that's not just a bean, that's a beetle. You freeze. The boy smiles unfazed. For protein, he says, and jogs off. You stand there chewing what might be a scarab wrapped in fava bean paste, thinking, really thinking, about your life choices. This isn't just a snack anymore. It's a food pyramid built out of question marks. And unfortunately, it's not a metaphor. You're staring at a mural painted on the side of a storage house. And it's literally a food pyramid, not like the one they taught you in school, no neat lines or categories. Just layer after layer of food stacked like offerings. Fish, bread, beer, onions, dates, garlic, figs, beans, more beans, and at the very top, a scarab. You have to laugh. Or cry, you're not sure which, but you're pretty sure this pyramid doesn't include kale. A woman in a linen wrap beckons you into her courtyard. There's a fire going and several pots arranged around a low table. You join the circle, children, elders, one sleepy goat, and she ladles something thick and greenish into your bowl. You taste it. Pureed lentils, broad beans, and a sprinkle of something spicy, maybe crushed mustard seeds or the ground sycamore pods. It's good, surprisingly so. Rich, warming, and layered with flavours you can't quite name. Then she tops it with a dollop of what looks like oil but smells alive. You raise an eyebrow. She grins. Fermented. Of course it is. You stir the oil into the mash. It changes the flavour completely. Deeper. Tanger. With a sharp finish that dances on the back of your tongue like a tiny priest with a lesson to teach. You ask what it's made of? She says beans and beetles, naturally. And here's your historical fact. Ancient Egyptians loved legumes. Fava beans, lentils, lupins, these were staple crops. Eaten by nearly everyone, from farmers to priests. Beans were dried, ground into flour, stewed into mush or mixed into bread dough. They provided essential protein in a world where meat wasn't always an option. And yes, bugs sometimes found their way into the mix, on purpose or not. Protein is protein. A child offers you a small clay dish filled with roasted lupin seeds coated in something dark and sticky. You taste one. Sweet, smoky, burnt molasses maybe. The seeds are hard to bite, but once you do, the flavour pops. It's a strange mix, snack and punishment in one. Now for your quirky fact. Lupin seeds were sometimes soaked in beer to make them softer, then dried again and served as chewing snacks, like ancient bar nuts. And yes, they were considered an aphrodisiac in some regions, because said apparently everything was an aphrodisiac, then you silently promise yourself to stop asking. After dinner, a man starts stacking up reed trays filled with thin cakes. You recognise the base, lentil flour mixed with mashed beans, but this version is topped with a glaze made of date syrup and crushed locust wings. You pause. He nods. For crunch, you chew carefully. The glaze is delicious. The wings, less so, flaky, sharp with an aftertaste that makes you rethink your definition of texture, but still, you're impressed. These people have turned survival ingredients into something with flavour, tradition, even flair. Now comes the scholarly debate. Were insects and beans equally valued, or was one always a backup plan? Some historians argue that bugs were fallback food, famine fare. Others believe certain insects were delicacies or symbolic offerings, tied to gods and renewal. Beetles, after all, were sacred. Eating them might have been seen as spiritual, or rebellious, or just practical. If it crawls and doesn't bite back, Why not? As the moon climbs higher, the courtyard dims. Oil lamps flicker. The goat burps. A quiet peace settles in. You're handed a final snack, a triangular pastry filled with mashed lentils, garlic and chopped beetles wrapped in crisp barley dough and fried in what smells like sheep fat. You take a bite. It's crunchy, savoury and honestly delicious. Either your taste buds have completely adjusted, or this is actually ancient fusion cuisine at its finest. Someone plays a flute. A child falls asleep curled against the goat. The fire dies down to glowing embers. You lean back, gazing at the stars, stomach full of beans and beetles, head full of questions. You think about the mural, the food pyramid, and realise how differently the ancients saw balance. They didn't obsess over carbs or fats. They thought about heat and coolness, dryness and wetness, the spiritual weight of a snack, the blessing in a bowl of lentils. You reach into your satchel, pull out a leftover roasted chickpea from yesterday, and pop it in your mouth. Crunch. Still good, still sacred in its own weird way. The next morning begins with a rhythmic thumping, soft but steady, like a heartbeat made of wood. You follow the sound past a field of half-harvested flax, through a stone archway smudged with soot, and into the courtyard of what appears to be a temple school. Not the kind that teaches geometry and poetry. This one teaches chewing. A circle of young novices sit cross-legged around a large flat stone. In the centre, a priest is grinding something with a long wooden pestle, muttering chants between strokes. The air smells sweet, floral, and faintly herbal. You take a cautious step closer. The stone is smeared with a dark, sticky paste the colour of overripe figs. You catch hints of lotus flower, dates, honey, and somehow wine. You sit quietly at the edge of the group. No one questions you. They're too focused. Every few moments the priest pinches a bit of the paste and rolls it into a ball, setting it on a tray to dry. The balls are bite-sized, dusted with powdered coriander, and almost too perfect to eat. Almost. The priest finally notices you, and without a word, tosses one in your direction. You catch it. You chew. It's chewy, dense, like taffy made from raisins and incense. There's a delicate bitterness under the honey, like dried herbs steeped in sun. Your tongue goes a little numb, your brain a little floaty. You blink slowly. Welcome to the sweet shop of the temple. Here's your historical fact. Priests often doubled as healers, pharmacists and candy makers. Sacred ingredients weren't just offered to the gods, they were consumed in rituals, medicine, and occasionally as temple treats. Chews made from lotus, myrrh and dates weren't just delicious, they were spiritually cleansing, or so they claimed. You're halfway through your second one, and honestly, you believe it. As the session continues, the novices begin singing a low, droning hymn. Between verses, they pass around bowls of ingredients, crushed blue lotus petals, soaked tamarind, powdered frankincense. You watch as they mix tiny batches of chewable offerings, each with a specific purpose, one for clarity, one for fertility, one to ward off snakes. You're not sure which one you just ate, but it's probably the one that makes the floor look like it's breathing. A novice next to you whispers that this is temple candy. Not for everyday snacking, these were spiritual sweets, consumed during ceremonies or gifted to favoured guests. You raise your eyebrows. Looks like you just got upgraded. Quirky fact time, blue lotus, a staple in many of these recipes, is mildly psychoactive. When steeped or chewed, it can induce relaxation, euphoria, and vivid dreams. It was often used in religious rituals to help priests and worshippers commune with the divine, or at least vibe in their general direction. You're currently communing with the wall, which appears to be melting ever so slightly. The priest claps his hands. Everyone falls silent. Another tray is brought forward, this one with a fresh batch of sweets, round, golden and glistening with honey. These are simpler, more traditional, date balls rolled in sesame and dipped in melted palm sugar. You try one, it's heavenly. Crunchy outside, gooey inside, and warm with something like cinnamon, but slightly smokier. Maybe charred acacia bark. One of the novices explains that during large temple festivals, these treats were handed out to the faithful, often alongside sacred beer or flavoured water. You imagine thousands of people gathered under colourful awnings, swaying to drums, sipping barley wine, and popping these chewy lotus date confections like ancient gummies. The priests must have known exactly what they were doing. And that brings us to your scholarly debate. Were these sacred chews true desserts, or were they more medicinal or symbolic in function? Some scholars argue that temple candy was more about ritual than indulgence, often mixed with ingredients meant to calm or cleanse. Others think priests simply knew that people would listen more closely to sermons if their mouths were busy with something sweet. Sound familiar? You're handed a final chew, a triangle-shaped lump made from crushed nuts, dried rose petals, and what tastes like honey-fermented fig. It's sticky, a little gritty, but fragrant beyond belief. You chew slowly, savouring the way it unfolds on your tongue like a blooming flower that also wants to punch your taste buds. Outside, bells ring. The novice circle disperses. One of them hands you a small pouch filled with sweets, tied with a thin string of linen. You tuck it into your belt and follow the others into the temple's outer garden. There more food awaits, but this time for the public. Clay bowls filled with fruit, bread soaked in beer and honey, and more of those triangular chews, now wrapped neatly in papyrus squares and stacked like offerings. You join the line of pilgrims, each taking a piece, bowing, and placing a scrap of food at the base of a statue before nibbling the rest. It's not just a snack, it's a contract, a prayer written in sugar. As you walk through the garden, nibbling respectfully, you watch families sitting on mats beneath fig trees, children licking honey from their hands, old women whispering prayers with mouths full of sesame. It's peaceful, strange, sacred, sweet. You find a quiet spot by a pond overrun with lilies and sit down, legs folded, hands sticky. You pull out one of your gifted chews and bite in. It tastes like the entire temple has been compressed into one soft, fragrant mouthful. It tastes like dreams and dust and something ancient you can't quite name. You sit there a long time chewing slowly, listening to the hum of bees and the soft rustle of linen in the breeze. You don't know what kind of magic was in those sweets, but you feel it now, warm, light, a gentle fluttering just behind your eyes. You smile, you close your eyes, and you let the temple candy take you somewhere else. You wake up with your face pressed into a woven reed mat, drool stuck to your cheek, and a hazy memory of chewing something floral and life-altering. There's a stickiness to your lips and something vaguely crunchy embedded in your hair, possibly a sesame seed, possibly a scarab. The temple garden is quiet now, shaded in that buttery late-morning glow, and your limbs feel like they have been soaked in warm barley tea, which honestly they might have been. You're not ruling anything out at this point. As you sit up, stretching out your lotus-laced limbs, a soft humming reaches your ears. Not chanting, not bees, something else. You follow the sound past a low wall, around a half-collapsed granary, and into the corner of a communal courtyard, where a small group of women are gathered around a stone fire pit. There's steam rising from a pot, a smell of burnt fruit and ambition, and a heavy air of concentration. One of the women turns to you and smiles, not kindly, not unkindly, just with the look of someone who's about to watch you fail at something very old and very sticky. You ask what they're making. She points to the pot and says, "Date syrup." You lean in. It looks like lava, thick, dark, bubbling like it has opinions. The smell hits your nose, molasses, smoke, fermented fruit, and a faint charred edge that tells you something's already gone slightly wrong. Another woman stirs with a stick that's probably older than your entire family tree. She gestures for you to try. You grasp the stick and give it a slow swirl. Congratulations, you're now officially participating in the ancient Egyptian art of ruining a perfectly good date harvest. You dip your finger into the syrup, blow on it and taste. It's aggressive. Sweet, yes, but in the way that grabs you by the throat and shakes a little. There's a bitterness underneath. Like someone cooked the fruit too long or got distracted telling a story about how their cousin's cousin swore a date tree could whisper if you listened closely. You nod politely, pretending this is what you expected. And now comes the quirky fact. While dates were beloved across Egypt, date syrup was tricky. Too little heat and it fermented weirdly. Too much and you got bitter sludge. It was used in sweets, medicine, offerings, and sometimes as a base for rudimentary alcohol. There's even evidence of date syrup being mixed with vinegar and herbs to create a kind of dipping sauce, like ancient salad dressing, if your salad was a bowl of barley mush and regret. The woman hands you a second pot and says they're starting a new batch. You're in charge. Great. You dump in the pitted dates, pour in some water from a cracked jug and start stirring. It smells better this time, sweeter, more inviting, like something you could drizzle over flatbread or offer to a minor deity in exchange for fewer digestive issues. While it simmers, the group prepares cakes. Not dessert cakes, not really. These are survival discs, barley flour mixed with the syrup, mashed fava beans, and dried herbs. The dough is rough, rolled into thick patties, then slapped onto hot stones. You help form one. It sticks to your fingers and sole. You cook it. Burn one side, flip. Cook the other, burn that side too, it's fine, the goat eats worse. Here's your historical fact: ancient Egyptian kitchens, especially communal ones, were full of this kind of trial and error. Recipes weren't written down, measurements didn't exist, and techniques were passed by hand, eye, and memory. Which means no one really knew what they were doing, but they did it anyway, guided by taste and tradition. Basically, it was one giant cooking show where everyone had sunstroke and no timer. You finally taste your syrup. It's not awful, a little smoky, a bit tangy. Definitely sweeter than the first batch, with a nice stickiness that clings to your teeth like a friendly parasite. The women nod approvingly. One slaps you gently on the arm and you realise you've passed the test. You're now certified in ancient syrup disappointment. Time for the scholarly debate. Did Egyptians use date syrup primarily for cooking, or was it medicinal, ceremonial, or even a form of preserved fruit for storage? Some archaeologists say it was used like honey, in everything from offerings to flavouring for beer and bread. Others argue it was mostly for rituals and healing, given its sometimes unpredictable taste and fermentation issues. There's even speculation that date syrup was used as a preservative for dried meat and fish, though no one seems eager to try that recipe today. As the cakes cool, the women offer you one with your syrup drizzled on top. You bite in. The outside is firm, the inside is hot and surprisingly chewy. The syrup helps. The herbs add complexity. For something cobbled together from leftovers and trial runs, it tastes ancient, like layers of thyme, dust, fire and figs rolled into a snack. A child runs by holding a dripping piece of syrup cake like it's a trophy. Another woman smears some on flatbread and sprinkles crushed carob over it. You try that version too. It's like a proto-chocolate tart made by someone who once read about sugar in a dream. Then comes the disaster. One of the syrup pots boils over. Instantly, the fire hisses and the courtyard fills with smoke and chaos. A woman screams. Someone drops a cake. The goat panics and knocks over a water jug. You grab a bundle of palm leaves and start fanning, coughing through the haze as molten date lava bubbles into the fire pit. Eventually the chaos settles. A few cakes are ruined. The pot is scorched, but no one seems angry. It's just another day. Another batch, another attempt. Syrup can always be made again. You help clean up, patting flour from your tunic, smearing your face with more date than dignity. Before you leave, they hand you a small sealed jar, a souvenir of your syrup disaster. You tuck it into your satchel with the rest of your slowly growing collection of ancient Egyptian "why did I eat that" artifacts. You walk away sticky, dusty and weirdly proud. You didn't just eat history today, you helped make it. Badly, yes, but still. As the sun sets behind the hills and the air cools to something almost kind and you lick a bit of date syrup from your thumb and smile, you've tasted time and burned it slightly. Evening arrives with a gentle hush, the kind that wraps itself around your shoulders like a soft blanket woven from Nile breeze and wood smoke. You're full, still faintly sticky from the date syrup incident, and your satchel now smells like burnt sugar and failure. But as you follow a trail of flickering oil lamps toward a nearby tomb site, something strange happens. The walls around you come alive. Not in a mystical horror movie way, more like very elaborate fan art. Painted scenes cover every surface: banquets, harvests, music, wine, dancing and food. So much food. Loaves stacked in pyramids, fruits spilling from bowls, roasted ducks, tall jugs of beer frothing over, and plates that look suspiciously like yesterday's chickpea nightmares. This isn't just decoration. This is a menu. And it's huge. You step closer. The paint is faded in places, chipped in others, but the detail is still there. Every swirl of honey, every slice of fish, every careful fold of dough baked into the symbolic shapes. Circles for the sun, triangles for rebirth, spirals for eternity. It's not just food, it's conceptual food. You're inside an edible philosophy. And then something incredible happens. The figures on the wall, at first frozen mid-bite, move. Their hands begin to stir pots. Heads tilt. A musician plucks a string. You blink once, hard, twice, no change on. Either the date syrup had some fermented side effects or you've stepped straight into a painted dream. You're no longer just looking at a feast, you're in it. You blink again and the air shifts. The torchlight is brighter. The sound of flutes rises. People dressed in linen, gold, and coal line long low tables piled with food. Someone grabs your arm, gently, and pulls you into a seat beside a laughing scribe and a woman with a falcon tattooed on her shoulder. They welcome you like you belong here. A bowl appears in front of you. Flatbread. Warm. Steam. Curling off the surface. You tear a piece, dip it into a thick stew of lentils and garlic, and take a bite. You moan softly. The texture is perfect. The lentils are soft but not mushy. The garlic bold without bullying. And there's a swirl of something nutty, maybe crushed tiger nut or roasted sesame. Then comes a cup of wine. Real wine. Not that soupy beer slurry from the workers' villages, but something red, dry, and slightly astringent. Your teeth instantly feel fancier. Here's your historical fact. In elite households, especially those of the nobility and higher officials, wine was a staple at formal banquets. Imported or locally fermented, stored in amphorae sealed with beeswax, it was sipped slowly, often flavoured with herbs, lotus essence, or even myrrh. Wine was for the living and the dead. Its jars show up just as frequently in tombs as on banquet tables. More dishes arrive, stacked trays of fruit tarts, date-filled pastries, and tiny roasted quail legs dipped in honey. You reach for a fig tart and take a bite. The pastry crumbles between your fingers. The fig inside is so ripe it's practically melting, its sweetness balanced by a dash of vinegar or sour grape extract. And here's your quirky fact of the night. Egyptians used souring agents, unripe grapes, fermented pomegranate, even pickled radish brine, to cut through the richness of sweet dishes. They understood flavour balance long before modern chefs gave it a French name. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, all present, all intentional. The woman beside you offers something new, a tiny cake topped with poppy seeds and what looks like a dusting of gold leaf. You hesitate. She winks. You eat it. It's light, subtly sweet with a hint of anise or maybe cinnamon bark. The gold leaf flakes off in your mouth like edible sunlight. It's absurd, it's decadent. You want 5 more. The scribe beside you explains that many of these dishes are made not just for pleasure but to represent something. Rebirth, prosperity, protection in the afterlife. Food in this context isn't just nutrition, it's communication with gods, with ancestors, with the idea of forever. Which brings us to the scholarly debate. Were these tomb paintings accurate representations of actual feasts, or were they idealized visions of what people wished they could eat forever? Some archaeologists argue that these meals were aspirational, a kind of posthumous wish list. Others believe that elite feasts were genuinely this extravagant. If not daily, then certainly for holidays, weddings, and deaths. And in Egypt, those 3 things weren't always clearly separate. You try to count the number of dishes in front of you, at least a dozen. There's a barley-stuffed duck glazed in honey and garlic, a fish wrapped in lotus leaves roasted with citrusy herbs you can't identify, a cake made from tiger nut flour, layered with chopped dates and candied almond slivers. You take tiny bites from each, knowing you'll regret it if you don't. A musician plays a soft melody in the corner. Children dance. A priest pours libations over a small altar piled with fruit and bread. And yet, this doesn't feel like a reenactment. It feels real. The way traditions are real, even when time moves on, the way smells and flavours can resurrect the past more vividly than a textbook ever could. And then someone says your name. You turn, startled. No one is looking at you. You blink. The table is empty. The torches are gone. You're standing alone in front of the painted wall again. The figures once more frozen in pigment. Silent, still. A breeze blows through the tomb's open corridor, carrying the scent of dust and fig. You check your satchel. There's a crumb, just one, golden, sticky, proof. You step back into the sun, blinking at the sudden light. Stomach full of food that may or may not exist anymore. You don't care, you were there, you tasted the afterlife, and it was absolutely seasoned to perfection. The sun is climbing again, and so are your blood sugar levels. You've been high on fig tarts, honey-glazed ducks, and the existential question of whether or not you hallucinated a dinner party with ghosts. Either way, your satchel now holds a single crumb of gold-dusted tiger nut cake that you're 50% sure wasn't there before. You decide not to question it. At this point, you've consumed so many ancient Egyptian delicacies, that reality is more of a suggestion. You wander toward a small village just outside the city, where the whitewashed walls lean a little too far to one side and the street smells like baked earth and boiling onions. Your nose crinkles. Not because it's unpleasant, but because it's aggressively oniony. The kind of scent that wraps itself around your hair, your soul, and whatever emotional baggage you're carrying. You turn a corner and immediately bump into a man carrying a sack nearly as big as he is. Onions. Dozens of them. He doesn't flinch, just nods and continues on his way, the weight swinging behind him like the world's worst perfume. And then you see it. A small courtyard with a low fire pit, several clay pots bubbling merrily, and a circle of women slicing, frying, grinding, and, yes, crying. You've just stepped into the heart of Egypt's most sacred and possibly smelliest obsession. Welcome to the onion zone. You're waved in by an older woman with eyes like obsidian and a knife in each hand. She hands you a bulb. You nod like you understand what's happening. You don't, but you start peeling anyway, and within moments your eyes water. Not a gentle trickle, this is full-on weeping. Your face is leaking, your nose is tingling, and your fingers now smell like vengeance. Strong ones, she says, smiling. Best for trade, best for the gods. You nod through your tears and keep peeling. Here's your historical fact. Onions were a cornerstone of the Egyptian diet. Not just food, but currency, medicine, offering. Workers were sometimes paid in onions, priests offered them to deities, mummies were buried with them. There's even evidence that onions were placed in the eye sockets of the deceased during burial rites. You'd think it was symbolic. It probably was. But still, onions. That's commitment. Your peeled onion goes into a pot already simmering with vinegar, garlic, coriander, and something sweet. Maybe date syrup or pomegranate molasses. The scent is divine, and also slightly threatening. You're handed a flatbread topped with this mixture and told to eat. You bite. Instant flavour explosion. It's sharp, sweet, sour, spicy all at once. Your mouth doesn't know which direction to run, so it just stays open and chews in awe. This is not the sad chopped onions on a burger. This is something ancient, sacred, and deeply addictive. Next up is a thick stew, onions sliced and slow cooked with lentils, olive oil, and crushed dried fish. You flinch at the last ingredient, but the woman insists. You try it. It's rich, creamy, and has that comforting back-of-the-throat warmth that says, you're probably getting enough nutrients today for once. Then comes the grilled onions, charred over open flame, sprinkled with dried mint and a pinch of salt. You're handed one on a stick. You chew through layers of salt smoky's sweetness, almost like roasted marshmallows that hate you. Here's your quirky fact. Onions were considered a symbol of eternity. Their layers were thought to represent the infinite. Circle within circle, flavour within flavour, life within death. This is why they were so closely associated with rituals, tombs, and the afterlife. Even pharaohs didn't get buried without them. Imagine being so revered that your final request is, just make sure I go out with some caramelized rings, okay? As you're eating, a heated debate breaks out among the women. One claims red onions are superior, another insists the white variety has more bite, a third rolls her eyes and says the real trick is pickling. You just nod and chew and try not to pick sides. Which brings us to your scholarly debate of the day. Were onions considered peasant food, elite fare, or both? Archaeological evidence shows onions were consumed at all levels of society, but the way they were prepared varied. Commoners ate them raw or boiled. The wealthy got stews, sauces, and the occasional exotic preparation involving honey, nuts, and vinegar reduction. Historians argue that onion recipes reflect a broader cultural truth. Everyone eats them, but the how reveals your place in the world. A girl nearby offers you a bundle of roasted onion bulbs wrapped in palm leaves, tied with a string made from flax fibre. Inside are whole onions stuffed with mashed barley, garlic, and chopped dates. You bite in. It's soft, a little spicy, and entirely too satisfying. You could eat 6, you eat 2, then 3. Someone starts singing, a slow winding song about harvests and rivers and something that might be about love but could also just be about really excellent produce. It's hard to tell. The sun dips lower. Someone hands you a clay jug of beer. You sip. It It pairs weirdly well with the onions. Of course it does. You sit back, belly full, eyes no longer burning, and exhale. There's something timeless about this courtyard. The smell, the laughter, the way everyone leans in when tasting someone else's dish. It's ancient, but it's also now, and here, and completely unapologetically onion-forward. Before you leave, they give you a gift. A linen-wrapped pouch of dried onion chips coated in salt and date sugar. You nibble one on the road, sweet, savoury, crisp, probably the world's first and most aggressively flavoured snack chip. You keep walking, the scent of onions now permanently embedded in your skin, your bag, and probably your soul. Somewhere in the distance a breeze shifts. Even it smells like onions. You spend the next several hours trying to walk off the onion hangover. The scent trails behind you like a curse. Every time the wind shifts, your own clothes betray you. You pass a group of temple guards, and one of them sniffs, narrows his eyes, and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "Somebody's been at the stew pot." You don't respond. You just keep walking, head high, breath hot enough to clear a room. Eventually, you find yourself following a canal out toward a farming compound. The land flattens, and suddenly you're surrounded by mud brick houses, thatched storage sheds, and fields that stretch out toward the horizon in a patchwork of greens and golds. There's a different kind of rhythm here, slower, steadier, less market chaos, more fieldwork fatigue, and it smells different. At first, you can't place it. Something earthy, a little sweet, a little wrong. You pass a few labourers unloading grain sacks, a woman stirring something in a wide ceramic basin, and then it hits you, not the smell, a literal crunch. You step in it, something small and dry. You look down and freeze. It's a pile of bugs, not live ones, roasted, toasted, seasoned. You back up cautiously as the woman looks up from her bowl. "Want some?" she asks cheerfully. She scoops a handful from a shallow basket and extends it toward you like an offering. It's a mix. You blink. Grasshoppers, crickets, beetle legs, something that looks like a tiny frog. You hesitate naturally. She chuckles and plucks one from the pile. Crunch. Gone. "This one's got sesame," she says, as if that makes it better. You sit down on a flat stone near the fire, suddenly aware that your entire life has been building to this moment. The granola of nightmares. She hands you a palm leaf cone filled with the roasted mix. You examine it. A cricket dusted in ground coriander. A beetle with a sheen of date syrup. And, yep, a dried frog leg coated in crushed flaxseed. You pick the cricket. You eat it. It's not terrible. Crunchy, nutty, a little dry, with an aftertaste that reminds you of roasted pumpkin seeds that spent too much time near a campfire. The woman nods approvingly. "Protein," she says. "Much easier than goats. And here's your historical fact. Insect consumption wasn't just a famine response in ancient Egypt. It was normal in some regions. Grasshoppers and locusts, in particular, were caught during swarming seasons, roasted or sun-dried, and stored for later. High protein, low effort. Some records even suggest they were traded regionally. And while we're at it, yes, frogs too. Small frogs dried whole were considered a delicacy in certain Nile Delta communities. You chew slowly, suddenly unsure about your recent dinner guests. The woman shows you how the mix is made. First, the bugs are trapped, some in woven baskets, others in sticky date resin traps set near irrigation ditches. Then they're rinsed, thank Ra, dried on reed mats, roasted in clay pans and seasoned. She adds sesame, ground lentils, salt, and a pinch of something floral, lotus powder maybe. Some are sweetened, some spiced. It's basically ancient Chex Mix with the added thrill of legs. Time for your quirky fact. Some tomb art even includes scenes of bug collection, usually as a side detail, like a servant in the background holding a basket of winged snacks. This has led to ongoing debates among Egyptologists. Were these snacks a humble staple or a ritual food offered in seasonal festivals? There's not enough evidence to be certain, but the fact that bug eating makes its way into funerary imagery suggests it had a role beyond mere desperation. The debate around frog snacks is even stranger. Some scholars argue they were only eaten when dried and preserved, due to their natural sliminess and, well, amphibianness. Others say they were fried whole and eaten as is, skin and all, seasoned with sour beer mash and left to crisp on hot stones. The truth, somewhere in between. You glance down at the tiny frog in your cone. It stares back. You take a bite. It's salty, crunchy, oddly satisfying. You don't hate it. You hate that you don't hate it. A group of children nearby are trading bug cones like candy. It's One girl has what appears to be a rare locust with caramel glaze. She holds onto it like treasure. Another kid eats a cricket, then immediately dares a friend to eat too. Chaos ensues. The woman laughs. You realise this is normal here. For them, bugs aren't creepy. They're crunchy, communal, and culturally embedded. And now, the scholarly debate of the hour. Are we modern eaters the weird ones for turning our noses up at insects? Or were the Egyptians just resourceful? Many anthropologists argue that insect consumption was pragmatic, efficient, renewable, high yield. Others suggest it also carried symbolic meaning. Eating creatures that survived fire, flood, and swarm could be seen as absorbing their resilience. Whatever the case, you're halfway through your cone and starting to feel pretty resilient yourself. To finish the meal, the woman hands you a piece of flatbread smeared with a paste made from mashed bugs, lentils, and fermented dates. It's smoky, tangy, spreadable, sort of like a protein-rich tapenade with antennae. You smear it on the bread and take a bite. Crunch, chew, swallow. You've come a long way. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the farmstead. Someone brings out a jug of date wine and a plate of honey-roasted grasshoppers on skewers. You don't even flinch, you just pick one up and bite off the leg. Before you leave, the woman hands you a small jar, dried cricket powder mixed with sesame, used for seasoning soups or sprinkling over bread. You thank her, tuck it into your ever-growing snack pouch, and walk slowly back toward the canal. The air smells like grain and sun-warmed dirt. A heron wades through a flooded ditch nearby. The trees rustle. Somewhere a frog croaks. You nod in solidarity. Your steps crunch on something underfoot. More bugs. You keep walking. This is fine. By now, you've accepted that your body is at least 30% composed of strange proteins, half of which had wings in a former life. There's a cricket leg still stuck between your molars. You've tried to dislodge it with a piece of barley flatbread, a papyrus stalk, and in a moment of desperation, a date pit. No luck. You've resigned yourself to the fact that this is just your life now, a life in which the phrase, "Did I just eat another exoskeleton?" is no longer a cause for alarm. You're trudging along the banks of a small canal, the water slow and green, when a group of teenagers runs past you with baskets slung over their backs. One of them yells something about nutcakes, which sounds both promising and ominous. You follow. The trail leads to a grove of low, twisted trees with broad leaves and odd, bulbous fruit hanging like ornaments. A man crouches nearby with a stone mallet cracking open the hard shells of what look like nuts, tubers, plant-based mysteries. The teens surround him, holding out clay bowls. As you approach, one of them shoves a piece of something sticky into your hand. You look down. It's brown, lumpy, dusted in something pale, maybe flour, maybe ground seeds. It smells sweet, but in a dense, almost dusty way, like someone tried to make candy in a pottery kiln. You take a bite. It's chewy, sticky, a little gritty, but strangely satisfying. The flavour is nutty with a hint of caramel and something floral underneath, maybe lotus or fenugreek. It's the kind of snack that doesn't wow you at first, but slowly builds its case. You finish it without even realising. The man chuckles. "Tiger nut," he says, holding up one of the hard little roots he's been smashing open. "Very good for digestion, very bad for teeth." You believe him. Here's your historical fact. Tiger nuts, actually a tuber from the sedge family, were a popular food source in ancient Egypt. Not technically a nut, but close enough. They were eaten raw, roasted, ground into flour, or soaked and mashed into milk-like drinks. Sometimes they were mixed with honey, dates, and spices to make cakes or energy bars. Think of them as ancient protein balls, except made with more effort and fewer Instagram hashtags. The man invites you to help with the prep. You sit beside him and try your hand at cracking the tubers. It's harder than it looks. Your first one shatters into useless dust, the second one rolls away. The third cracks just right. You feel victorious. No one notices. The women nearby are mixing ingredients for more cakes. Mashed tiger nuts, honey, dates, and what looks like ground lupin beans. The mixture is thick, sticky, and smells like the inside of an herbalist's dream. You dip your finger in, sweet, gritty, slightly spicy. You'd buy this at a health food store if you saw it on a shelf next to overpriced almond butter and bags of sadness labelled Superfood Crunch. Quirky fact, in addition to being food, tiger nuts were believed to have aphrodisiac properties and were sometimes used in love potions. They also show up in some medical texts as cures for flatulence, fevers, and various women's ailments. That's a lot of responsibility for a tuber. One of the teens hands you a cooled cake wrapped in a fig leaf. You unwrap it and bite in. This version is softer, more refined. The honey is caramelized and the addition of crushed dates makes it sticky and rich. There's also a hint of cinnamon bark. You feel momentarily luxurious. If royalty had snacked on health bars, this would have been it. Time for today's scholarly debate. How much of the ancient Egyptian diet was focused on convenience foods? Portable, non-perishable snacks designed to travel well and energize workers on the go. Some scholars argue that cakes like these weren't just treats, they were fuel. Soldiers carried them, builders ate them during long shifts, farmers stored them through lean seasons. Others suggest that some were reserved for rituals or offerings, especially when spiced or wrapped symbolically. Either way, these nutcakes were the granola bars of the Nile. You're given a small pouch made from folded papyrus and filled with tiger nut flour. It smells faintly nutty, almost sweet. One woman explains that it can be mixed with water to make a milk-like drink. She pours you some from a tall jar. It's thick, chalky, but pleasant. Slightly sweet, slightly earthy. You nod appreciatively while secretly wondering if this is going to cause another round of digestive surprises later. The afternoon sun creeps lower, and the kids begin roasting another batch of the tiger nuts over a flat stone. The scent is smoky, almost coffee-like. One of them crushes the roasted tubers into powder and mixes it with honey and dried fig. This batch is more like candy. Dense, sticky and energy-packed. You take a bite and feel your teeth sink in with a satisfying pull. It's a little bit dessert, a little bit construction adhesive, and it's working. They offer you a final taste, a tiny ball dusted in ground coriander, with a single sesame seed pressed on top like a garnish. It's symbolic, the woman says. One seed for strength, one bite for memory. You chew slowly, letting the flavours settle. This is a food made for walking, for building, for sweating under the Egyptian sun while balancing baskets and dreams and possibly several onion bulbs. You help clean up the stone slabs, your hands coated in flour and honey, and some unknown plant resin that refuses to leave. You're handed one last cake for the road and a thin reed necklace strung with dried tiger nuts. For luck, someone says. You wear it anyway. As you walk back toward the canal, chewing thoughtfully on the leftover cake, you realise something. This isn't just about hunger. It's about endurance. These snacks weren't meant to dazzle. They weren't about prestige or indulgence. They were about staying upright, getting through the day, building pyramids with sore hands and empty stomachs and just enough sweetness to keep moving. You take another bite, and you keep moving. You wake up to the sound of pounding grain, which is not so much an alarm clock as it is a rhythmic thump that reminds you how heavy food used to be, literally. You've found a new place to crash for the night, a low, cool grain storage room near the edge of a granary complex. There's a mat. There's shade. There are also about 5 million insects, and a cat that may or may not be judging you. Outside, the pounding continues. You follow the noise to its source. A wide-open courtyard where half a dozen women are working large mortars and pestles in perfect, almost hypnotic sync. Barley and emmer wheat, the two most fundamental grains in the Egyptian diet, are being pounded into submission beneath their practiced hands. Dust rises with every thud, catching in the morning light and turning the air golden. You sit and watch for a while. Eventually, someone notices you and hands you a bowl. Not food, just raw barley. You get the message. It's your turn to work. You grab a wooden pestle, twice the size of your forearm and twice as heavy, and start pounding. Your first few strikes bounce like a child hitting a drum. The woman beside you doesn't say anything, but you can feel her judgment radiating across the mortar. You adjust your grip. You focus. You hit again. This time the grain cracks. A nod. You're improving. Here's your historical fact. Ancient Egyptians didn't just eat grain, they lived by it. Barley and emmer were staples used for bread, porridge, beer, and even as currency. Grain was stored, rationed, paid as wages. Temples and granaries functioned like banks with records meticulously kept on papyrus. If you controlled grain, you controlled life itself, which makes this moment, your sweaty, awkward barley pounding session, kind of important. Eventually, the ground grain is passed to another group who sift it with woven baskets. The fine flour falls into shallow trays while the larger husks are set aside. You're handed a bowl of the coarse stuff and told to mix it with water and date syrup. You kneel beside the fire pit where flat stones are heating under coals. The woman next to you shows you how to shape the dough. Flat, round, pressed gently with fingers and smoothed along the edges like tiny sun discs. She lays one onto the stone. It sizzles slightly. You lay yours next to hers. It sticks. You panic and try to lift it. You tear it in half. You are not a baker. Yet. Quirky fact time. Egyptian bread came in hundreds of shapes and sizes. Cones, spirals, domes, fish-shaped loaves, and even miniature bread figurines. Some were decorative, some ritualistic, and some were just there to hold more beer. The bread you're making now is basic. Worker bread. Dense, chewy, and designed to fuel a full day in the fields or on the temple construction line. Think of it as the ancient power bar minus the wrapper and marketing. Your second try goes better. You let it sit. You resist the urge to poke. When you flip it, the bottom is golden and crisp. You've made bread, sort of. While the loaves cook, you're handed a cup of something cold. You drink. It's sweet, tangy, and a little gritty. It takes you a second to place it. Fermented barley water. Not quite beer, but not beer either. The perfect midday hydration / calorie boost. You wipe your mouth and nod in approval. No one cares. As the bread cools, the group gathers around a communal bowl filled with lentil stew. It's thick, almost a paste spiced with garlic, onions, and crushed coriander. You scoop some with your bread and eat. The crunch of the outer crust gives way to soft, grainy warmth. It's not gourmet, but it's real, honest, and kind of addictive. Then someone offers you the good stuff, a rare treat saved for festivals or guests. It's a dense bread cake made with the same flour but enriched with honey, tiger nut and chopped dates, then baked in a clay pot and sprinkled with toasted seeds. You take a bite and immediately forget every time you mocked historical food as primitive. This is divine, sweet, nutty, just a little smoky from the fire. It tastes like celebration. Which brings us to the scholarly debate of the hour. Was all Egyptian bread coarse and utilitarian, or did more refined versions exist outside of elite households? Traditional assumptions painted ancient bread as gritty, loaded with sand and bits of stone from the grinding process. But recent experimental archaeology has shown that even lower-class households knew how to sift, soak, and season their bread to make it more palatable. The presence of fruit, seeds, and sweeteners in some samples suggests that variation in bread quality was more widespread than we thought. You try another slice of the date cake. It's still warm in the centre. A woman breaks off a piece and wraps it in a bit of linen for you. For the road, she says. You bow in thanks. You'd die for this woman now. Probably have already. The sun is higher and the pounding has slowed. Someone passes a bowl of fermented grain mash, still warm, slightly sour, meant to be stirred into beer vats. You try a spoonful. It's like a tangy oatmeal with aspirations of becoming soup. You wouldn't eat a full bowl, but you respect it. As you rise to leave, they hand you a bundle of flatbreads, charred at the edges, still warm. Share them, someone says. You nod. You will. Maybe. You walk back toward the river, the smell of fire-baked grain clinging to your tunic. Your arms filled with bread, your heart strangely full. Grain wasn't just survival here, it was identity, community, ceremony, life. And now, it's also your backpack. By now, you've chewed your way through more history than any textbook could offer. You've tasted bugs, burned your tongue on fermented lentil paste, cried over onions, and bonded with strangers over flatbread that could probably survive a sandstorm. And yet somehow your journey isn't over. Because as any ancient Egyptian would tell you, the final course doesn't come at the end of the meal. It comes after life itself. So here you are, walking toward a necropolis. The air is quiet, heavy, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something. You pass between massive limestone pillars, their shadows long and solemn. Carvings line every surface, gods with animal heads, offerings stacked neatly, figures in perfect profile holding platters of bread, beer and fruit. The deeper you walk, the cooler the air gets, and the smells shift from fresh-baked barley to something older, sweeter and stranger, like spices left too long in a sealed jar. You step into a tomb chamber, not a grand pharaoh's mausoleum, but a middle-class burial, preserved enough to feel lived in, or died in depending on how you want to frame it. A low altar sits near the back wall, stacked with replicas of food offerings, Fake loaves, pottery bowls, stone-carved cuts of meat, all carefully arranged, as if someone expected the deceased to get a bit peckish on their journey through the afterlife. Then you notice something real, not carved, not painted. A sealed jar in the corner, its wax plug cracked, its contents shimmering faintly in the dim light. You kneel beside it and peer in. The scent hits you instantly, honey. Thick, unspoiled. Somehow still fragrant after all these centuries. You dip a finger inside cautiously. The taste is impossible, sweet, pure, a little floral, like time itself has been distilled into syrup. Here's your final historical fact. The Egyptians were masters of preservation. Honey wasn't just a sweetener. It was a preservative, an offering, and sometimes even part of the embalming process. Archaeologists have found pots of honey in tombs that are over 3,000 years old, and still edible. It's the only food that doesn't spoil. In Egypt, that wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. Honey represented eternity. You sit back on your heels, licking honey from your fingertip in the middle of a tomb. This is fine. Quirky fact to end your trip. Some tombs included spells or instructions for transforming food in the afterlife. As in, if this bread turns to dust, may it become fresh again by the words of Osiris. The belief wasn't just that the dead would be given food. It was that they could manifest it, recreate it, reheat it with divine energy. Instant leftovers with the power of magic and myth. You lie back for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Stars are painted above you, deep blue and flecked with gold, and it feels like the tomb is breathing. Not in a creepy way, more like the walls remember something you don't. And here comes your final scholarly debate. Was ancient Egyptian funerary food entirely symbolic, or did people really believe these offerings would physically nourish the dead? Some scholars say it was all metaphor, representations of sustenance. Others believe that for the Egyptians, the boundary between the physical and spiritual was far more porous. To them, a painted duck was as real as a roasted one, given the right spell and ritual. Belief gave substance, faith gave flavour. You stand, brushing the dust from your clothes, your satchel now absurdly full, bread, dried onion chips, a tiny jar of cricket powder, possibly cursed fig tarts, and now a bit of 3,000-year-old honey, tucked into a linen scrap, like it's the most normal souvenir in the world. You walk back through the necropolis as the light begins to shift. The horizon glows orange. Somewhere, far away, someone is baking flatbread, probably overcooking it, and not caring one bit. You pass a small shrine where a loaf of barley bread has been placed fresh on the stone, still warm. You smile. Before you leave, you sit by the Nile one last time. You unpack your satchel and take out one thing, a palm-sized triangle of tiger nut cake, slightly crumbled, still fragrant with sesame and spice. You eat it slowly, chew by chew, and you realise something you've known all along, somewhere deep beneath the onion-induced tears and lotus-stained fingers. Food wasn't just fuel to the ancient Egyptians, it was love, memory, a spell, and in the end, isn't that what all the best meals are? You lean back, staring at the stars just beginning to appear above the water, and exhale. Your belly is full, your feet are tired, your breath still smells faintly of roasted frog. You've eaten like the ancient world, you've survived, just barely, and you'd do it all again tomorrow. So here you are, back beneath your own blanket, or maybe a weighted one if you've really leaned into your grown-up self-care era. Either way, your head is sinking into your pillow, and your thoughts are still lingering somewhere between a barley loaf and a honey-glazed cricket. Let it drift, let it all drift. The roar of market chatter, the low slap of flatbread on hot stone, the rhythmic pounding of grain beneath wooden pestles. It's fading now, slowing, like your heartbeat, like your breath. That ancient world, sun-scorched and spice-scented, is folding in on itself, tucking you in with it. You're still holding in your mind's palm that last bite of tiger nut cake, still tasting that stubborn smear of date syrup from earlier. You didn't expect any of this to feel so real, did you? Just a story about junk food and old tombs, and yet here you are, half asleep and slightly hungry. Let your body sink, let your stomach settle. You made it. You made it through the swamp of barley porridge and sour beer and pickled frog snacks. You stood beside bakers, farmers, priests. You saw how food wasn't just something to survive on. It was celebration, ceremony, even rebellion. The ancient Egyptians didn't rush their meals, and tonight neither did you. So now, close your eyes. Seriously, you can let go Let the Nile carry your thoughts downstream. Let your breath slow with the rhythm of reed flutes in the background. You've earned your rest. Tomorrow will still be here, but tonight belongs to pharaohs, field hands, and that goat who stole your bread. Sleep tight, my time-travelling snack champion. You made history delicious.